So imagine for a second that you need a really complex heart transplant.
Okay, high stakes right out of the gate.
Right, exactly. Like
Yeah.
it is literally a matter of life or death, and you're holding the dossiers of two potential surgeons.
Let me guess, they have very different backgrounds.
Just a bit. On one hand, you have a Harvard-trained cardiovascular specialist. We are talking 3 decades of clinical experience, endless hospital resources, and a wall just plastered with prestigious medical awards.
Pretty much exactly what you want when your chest is open.
Exactly. But on the other hand, you have a local janitor. He has a high school diploma and zero medical training. Who do you choose to perform the surgery?
Well, obviously the Harvard surgeon. I mean, nobody is picking the janitor.
Right. The answer is totally obvious because you want the expert. But here is the critical pivot for you, the listener. What if the goal wasn't a successful surgery? What if your actual goal was building a multi-million-dollar fortune from scratch?
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, in that specific scenario, leaning on the janitor might actually be your safest bet.
It sounds completely absurd when you frame it that way, mostly because, we are fundamentally conditioned to associate exceptional outcomes with exceptional training.
Right, because that correlation holds true in almost every specialized field, right?
Whoa, absolutely. Like, if we
Yeah.
were talking about structural engineering, you can't just have a novice accidentally design a superior suspension bridge. The domain dependence of hard skills is absolute.
You either know the math or you don't.
Exactly. But finance operates on an entirely different dimensional plane.
And that tension is exactly what we are unpacking today. Welcome to today's deep dive into the psychology of money, relying on some incredible foundational source material by Morgan Housel.
It's a really fascinating area to explore.
It really is. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore a reality that is deeply counterintuitive for anyone interested in business, entrepreneurship, or, simply building wealth.
Because we're going to deconstruct how finance is perhaps the single field in the entire world where someone with absolutely no formal education can win.
Right? No background, no high-level connections, and they can still massively outperform someone with the absolute best training and resources available.
Which forces us to realize something pretty uncomfortable. Financial success is not a hard science.
It's not about being the smartest person in the room.
Not at all. It is not about calculus, and it's certainly not about perfectly optimized spreadsheets. It's a soft skill. It is fundamentally driven by human behavior.
And over the course of this deep dive, we are going to walk through the underlying mechanics of that behavior.
We'll look at why seemingly irrational financial decisions are actually, perfectly logical to the people making them.
We're also going to get into how generational trauma rewires our risk tolerance and why we are all essentially operating in a financial system that is barely out of its infancy.
The practical takeaway here for you is massive. Understanding these psychological levers isn't just about optimizing a portfolio.
It's so much bigger than that.
Yeah, it's the ultimate shortcut to becoming a much more empathetic observer of the world around you, and honestly, a vastly better decision maker in your own business or career.
So if emotional regulation matters more than IQ, let's look at what happens when someone possesses extreme intelligence but zero emotional control.
This is where the stories get really wild.
Oh, they are insane. The source material highlights 3 specific characters that perfectly illustrate this paradox. First up, we have a wildly successful technology executive,
A literal genius on paper.
a certified patent-holding genius. In his 20s, he designed a key component for Wi-Fi routers. He started companies, sold them, and accumulated an absolute fortune.
So he won the capitalist game early.
He completely won it. But his psychological relationship with that capital was a volatile cocktail. It was this mix of deep insecurity and what can only be described as childish hubris.
And that combination, extreme liquid wealth and a fragile ego, is incredibly dangerous.
That's-
Well, in behavioral economics, we often see this phenomenon where success in one highly complex domain creates a false confidence.
Like tech engineering in his case.
Right. It creates a confidence that bleeds over into every other domain. It's a classic hubris spillover. They assume that because they conquered software, they have basically mastered the universe.
And the behavioral manifestations of that hubris were staggering. For example, this executive used to walk around carrying a stack of $100 bills.
Like, just in his pocket?
Yeah, several inches thick. He would actively display it to people just to establish dominance in a room.
That is painfully insecure.
Right. But the story that really blew my mind was the gold coin incident.
Oh, this one is unbelievable.
He literally hands a colleague several $1,000s in cash, tells him to go down to a local jewelry store, and instructs him to buy a handful of $1,000 gold coins.
And we should clarify, this was not as an investment hedge.
No, strictly as a theatrical prop. When the colleague returns with the coins, this tech executive and his buddies go down to a dock overlooking the Pacific Ocean.
And they just start throwing them in.
Yeah. They proceed to throw these $1,000 gold coins into the sea. They were skipping them like rocks, laughing and arguing about whose coin went the furthest.
It's hard to even process that level of waste.
And if you think that's just a one-off eccentric moment, get this. A few days later, he accidentally shatters a lamp in a hotel restaurant.
Just clumsy, I assume.
Yeah, an accident. But the manager comes over and informs him that it's a $500 lamp, and he will have to cover the cost.
A normal request.
Totally normal. But the executive pulls that brick of cash from his pocket, peels off $5,000, and throws it directly at the manager.
Just threw it at it.
Threw it at him and said, "Here's $5,000, now get out of my face and don't ever insult me like that again."
What is mechanically happening there is a complete detachment from the utility of money.
He's not using it like a normal person.
Exactly. He is not using capital as a tool for compound growth or security or enterprise building. He's using it entirely for status signaling.
Like buying an expensive watch, but way more aggressive.
Right. It is an extreme weaponized form of purchasing what we call Veblen goods, except instead of buying a Rolex to signal wealth, he is literally destroying capital to prove he is immune to its loss.
And spoiler alert, you're never immune.
No. As the source material bluntly notes, that specific behavioral loop has a rapid expiration date. He eventually went completely broke.
Which brings into sharp relief our second character, Ronald Reed.
The complete opposite end of the spectrum.
If the tech executive was highly educated but behaviorally bankrupt, Ronald Reed is the exact inverse. Reed was a rural Vermont janitor and a gas station attendant.
A very blue-collar life.
Very. He was the very first person in his family to graduate high school, and he actually had to hitchhike to campus just to attend.
That shows a lot of quiet determination.
Yeah. And then he fixed cars for 25 years, swept floors at JCPenney for 17 years, and bought a two-bedroom house for $12,000 at age 38. He lived there until he died.
So his primary hobby wasn't skipping gold into the ocean.
No, his primary hobby was chopping firewood.
A life defined by absolute low-time preference behavior.
Exactly. So he died in 2014 at the age of 92. Now, in 2014, nearly 3 million Americans passed away. Out of those 3 million, fewer than 4,000 had a net worth of over $8 million.
And Ronald Reed was one of them.
He was one of them. He died with over $8 million in assets.
Which is just staggering for a janitor.
Right. He left $2 million to his stepkids and more than $6 million to his local hospital and library. When this hit the international news, everyone in his town was completely baffled.
They had no idea he had that kind of wealth.
None. There was no secret inheritance, no winning lottery ticket. His secret was just saving whatever little he could from his paychecks, systematically investing it in blue-chip stocks, and then enduring the psychological test of waiting.
We really need to pause on that word, enduring.
It's harder than it sounds.
It is incredibly hard. It is easy to gloss over his strategy as simply buying and holding. But think about the psychological fortitude required to execute that over a 50-year time horizon.
He had to live through a lot of market crashes.
Exactly. Ronald Reed had to hold those stocks through the stagflation of the 1970s, the Black Monday crash of 1987, the dot-com bubble bursting in 2000, and the great financial crisis of 2008.
All those moments where everyone was panicking.
Right. While brilliant Wall Street analysts were panic selling and liquidating portfolios because their cortisol levels were overriding their prefrontal cortexes, a Vermont janitor just kept sweeping floors.
Sweeping floors and letting compound interest do its heavy lifting.
It's the ultimate triumph of temperament over intellect.
But the contrast really isn't complete until we introduce the third character from the sources, Richard Fuscone.
He is the cardiovascular surgeon from your opening metaphor.
Exactly. Harvard-educated, Merrill Lynch executive. He had an MBA. He was even featured on Crane's 40 Under 40 lists.
A real master of the universe type.
Totally. His own CEO publicly praised his business savvy and sound judgment. He possessed every single pedagogical pedigree you could possibly want in a financial professional.
He represents the absolute apex of institutional financial education.
So what did he do with all that institutional savvy? He borrowed heavily to expand an 18,000 square foot mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut.
18,000 square feet.
Yeah, we're talking 11 bathrooms, 2 elevators, 2 pools, and a baseline monthly maintenance cost of $90,000 just for maintenance.
$90,000 a month. That is immense leverage.
And then the 2008 financial crisis hit. Because his wealth was built on all that leverage and debt, it just vaporized. He was left completely bankrupt.
Just wiped out entirely.
He was literally telling a bankruptcy judge he had zero income. His homes were sold in foreclosure options at a 75% discount.
The juxtaposition of Fuscone and Reed forces a massive paradigm shift.
It really does. How does the Harvard MBA end up penniless while the janitor ends up a multi-millionaire philanthropist?
Because the chasm between their outcomes was not dictated by intelligence. It wasn't about access to Bloomberg terminals or sophisticated risk modeling software.
It was behavior.
Pure behavior.
Oh.
Fuscone's ruin was driven by yield chasing and social proof, the pressure to maintain relative status among his Greenwich hedge fund peers.
He had to keep up appearances.
Exactly. But Reed's success was driven by immunity to social pressure and an infinite time horizon. The gap in their formal education was entirely eclipsed by a single behavioral truth.
Which is?
Reed was patient, and Fuscone was greedy.
Which proves the underlying thesis of the sources. Finance is not physics. But I have to admit, I struggle with the simplicity of this sometimes.
Oh, so?
Well, if the rules of money are actually so rudimentary, save a percentage of your income, diversify, buy low, sell high, avoid catastrophic debt, why is it so agonizingly difficult for incredibly smart people to just execute the formula?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. If we know the math, why do we constantly fail the test?
Because knowing the math is an intellectual exercise, but executing the math is a biological one.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it.
We continually make the mistake of teaching personal finance like it's a hard science, like thermodynamics. In medicine or engineering, science has drastically improved outcomes because the physical world obeys strict physical laws.
A bridge doesn't care if you're anxious.
Exactly. A bridge will stand if the math is right, period. But the stock market is entirely composed of human anxiety and euphoria.
So it's the difference between knowing the theory of gravity and the actual feeling of falling.
That's a great way to look at it.
Because knowing the precise historical correlation between interest rates and stock valuations tells you absolutely nothing about the visceral panic that happens in your brain when the market crashes 30%.
Not a thing.
You log into your retirement account, you see a massive red line pointing downward, and your brain doesn't see a temporary macroeconomic fluctuation.
No, your amygdala fires up.
Right. Your brain sees a literal threat to your survival. It wonders how you are going to feed your family or pay for your kids' college. The spreadsheet math just doesn't factor in the cortisol dump.
Precisely. The spreadsheet assumes you are a perfectly rational actor making optimal expected value calculations at all times.
The famous Homo economicus.
Yes. Behavioral economists call this hypothetical, perfectly rational being Homo economicus. But Homo economicus does not exist.
We are messy humans.
You are a human being with an ego, a mortgage, and a highly evolved threat detection system in your brain. When the market crashes, that threat detection system screams at you to act, to flee, to sell.
Even though the math explicitly says to stay put.
Exactly.
Okay, so if financial success relies on overriding these deep biological and emotional impulses, how are those impulses actually formed in the first place?
That's where the environment comes in.
Right. Are we all just walking around with the exact same blind spots, or do our brains acquire this emotional programming differently? This leads us into an incredibly profound concept from the sources regarding how we view the world.
It's what we might call the 0.000000001% rule.
Break that down for us.
The core premise is this: your personal lived experiences with money make up maybe 0.0000001% of what has actually happened in global financial history.
A tiny, tiny fraction.
Basically nothing. But those exact same tiny experiences make up about 80% of how you think the entire world works.
Which means we are all confidently navigating 100% of our lives based on an infinitely small, highly localized, completely biased data set.
Exactly. We are anchored to our own realities, and we project our localized experiences onto global phenomena.
It's hard to see past our own noses.
The neurobiology of experiential learning tells us that reading about a trauma in a textbook, uses a completely different neural pathway than physically living through that trauma.
The John F. Kennedy story in the source material highlights this perfectly.
Oh, that's a brilliant example.
So JFK ran for president in 1960. At that time, the Great Depression was still the defining economic trauma of the American electorate.
It was a shadow hanging over everything.
Yeah, millions of voters were psychologically and financially scarred by the breadlines, the bank runs, and just the sheer desperation of the 1930s. But during the campaign, a reporter asked JFK what he specifically remembered from the Depression.
And his answer was startlingly honest.
It was. He essentially admitted that he had no firsthand knowledge of the suffering.
His socioeconomic insulation was total.
Total insulation. His family actually grew significantly wealthier during the Depression.
Which is wild to think about.
Right. He casually mentioned that they had bigger houses, more servants, and traveled more.
It's just a completely different reality.
The only direct exposure he had to the defining economic catastrophe of the 20th century was his father hiring extra gardeners out of pity just to give local men a job so they could eat.
Wow.
He told the reporter he didn't truly learn about the severity of the Depression until he read about it in a textbook at Harvard.
And you can imagine the reaction from the electorate.
Voters were appalled.
Naturally. To the average American who had literally starved, the idea of handing the economy to a man who had only studied the Depression academically was terrifying.
It felt like a massive disconnect.
Because to them, studying a GDP contraction is not the same as feeling the shame of losing your family home.
Right, he didn't feel it in his bones.
Kennedy only managed to overcome this massive political hurdle because he shared a different, equally powerful emotional experience with those voters World War II.
Oh, interesting. So that bridged the gap.
Yes, that shared trauma of military service bridged the empathy gap. But it proves the rule. No amount of elite academic study can genuinely recreate the somatic marker of fear.
I love how you phrased that, the somatic marker of fear. It's like muscle memory.
That's exactly what it is.
And there's a much more modern story in the text that drives this concept home, and it completely shatters our typical Western assumptions.
The factory story, right?
Yeah, a few years ago, the New York Times ran a major expose on Foxconn. They're the massive Taiwanese electronics manufacturer responsible for building iPhones.
Right. Everyone read that piece.
The report detailed atrocious sweatshop-like working conditions, suicide nets, endless shifts, punishing environments. American readers were rightfully outraged.
It looked awful from our perspective.
But then, a fascinating perspective emerged from the nephew of a Chinese worker.
It's a brilliant example of how relative deprivation dictates our moral and financial compass.
Exactly. This nephew wrote a response stating that his aunt used to work in those exact Foxconn factories, and he acknowledged that yes, it was hard labor, long hours, and small wages.
He didn't deny the conditions.
No, he didn't. But, and this is the crucial context, before she worked in the factory, she was a prostitute.
That completely shifts the baseline.
To her, being, quote-unquote, exploited by an evil capitalist boss in a sweatshop for a few dollars a day was a massive, life-altering upgrade.
Compared to the alternative.
Yes, compared to having her physical body exploited by men for pennies in the streets. He was actually frustrated by the American outrage because he felt it completely ignored the reality of their local infrastructure and the total absence of better opportunities.
When you apply the psychological framework of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to this, it makes perfect sense.
Break that down for us.
Well, the American reader, sitting in a climate-controlled office in Chicago, is comparing the sweatshop to standard Western corporate life. They are evaluating it on the higher tiers of self-actualization and fairness.
Which makes it look terrible.
Right, but the Chinese worker is comparing the sweatshop to absolute physical destitution and violence. They are evaluating it purely on the foundational tier of basic survival.
So they are both right, in a way.
Yes. We have equally smart, equally compassionate people looking at the exact same objective information as sweatshop and drawing wildly different yet completely logically valid conclusions based on their lived experiences.
Investor Michael Batnick has a quote in the source material that sums this up beautifully. He says, "Some lessons have to be experienced before they can be understood."
It's a very humbling thought.
It is. It's impossible to truly explain the feeling of losing your house in a foreclosure auction to someone who has lived their entire life on a trust fund during an economic boom.
You can show them the math, but you can't show them the panic.
Exactly. It's literally like trying to explain the color red to someone who is born blind.
Which is precisely why equally intelligent people can disagree vehemently about how to invest, or how recessions happen, or what risks are worth taking.
It's not an intelligence issue at all.
No, it's not that one person is a brilliant strategist and the other is a fool. It's that they have lived entirely different lives, shaped by different, equally persuasive economic ecosystems.
But this leads us to a really uncomfortable realization. If our foundational views on risk and money are shaped by our lived experiences, how much of our financial behavior is essentially just, well, dumb luck?
It's a scary question to ask.
I want to dive deep into this 2006 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research. Economists Ulrich Malmendier and Stefan Nagel didn't just run a quick survey.
No, this was comprehensive.
They looked at 50 years of data from the Survey of Consumer Finances. They were tracking what Americans actually did with their money over their entire lifetimes.
And that study is a cornerstone of behavioral finance because it completely upends traditional economic theory.
How so?
Under classical theory, a rational investor should make decisions based on their future goals and the mathematical characteristics of the investment options available right now.
Like looking forward, not backward.
Exactly. But that is not what the 50 years of data showed. The study conclusively proved that an individual's lifetime investment decisions are heavily anchored to the macroeconomic experiences they had during a very specific window.
Which window?
Their late teens and early 20s.
Their formative cognitive years.
Yes. The neuroplasticity of financial trauma or euphoria in early adulthood creates a permanent lens through which they view the market.
So let's look at the actual data cohorts.
Sure. Take a group of people born in 1950 and compare them to a cohort born in 1970.
Okay, 20-year difference.
The 1970 babies came of age in the 1980s and 20s. During their impressionable teens and 20s, they watched the S&P 500 increase almost tenfold, adjusted for inflation.
It was a massive bull market.
Right. To their developing brains, the stock market is an infallible, magical, wealth-generating machine.
But the cohort born in 1950, what did they see?
The 1950 babies came of age in the late 1960s and 70s. They experienced the Nifty 50 crash and a decade of stagflation.
So it was just flat.
Worse than flat. During their exact same formative window, the stock market literally went nowhere. Zero growth, adjusted for inflation.
Wow.
So you have two groups of people, separated solely by the random lottery of their birth year, walking through the rest of their adult lives with fundamentally incompatible views on market risk.
Let me guess, the 70s cohort is aggressive and the 50s cohort is timid.
It's exactly. The 1970 cohort takes aggressive equity positions. The 1950 cohort favors extreme timidity and capital preservation.
I like to think of it like touching a hot stove. It's muscle memory.
That's a perfect analogy.
If you touch a hot stove at age 18 and burn your hand severely, your hand will instinctively flinch when you see a stove at age 50. Even if a scientist stands there and mathematically proves to you that the stove is currently unplugged.
Your brain just says danger.
Yeah, the macroeconomic environment of your youth is that hot stove.
And we see the exact same anchoring effect with inflation.
Oh, inflation is huge.
If you were coming of age in the 1970s, you experienced the Volcker shock. Prices were tripling.
Gas lines rationing.
Yes, you vividly remember the creeping dread of paychecks that bought less and less every single month. Inflation was a monster under the bed that actually bit you.
But if you were born in 1990,
Up until the post-pandemic supply chain shocks, you lived your entire conscious life in a historically anomalous period where inflation was so low it didn't even factor into your daily planning.
the monster under the bed just didn't exist for the 1990 cohort.
Exactly.
The sources bring up Bill Gross, the legendary bond manager, as a prime example of this serendipity.
Yes, the bond king.
He openly admitted that he likely wouldn't be a billionaire if he had been born 10 years earlier or later.
That takes a lot of self-awareness to admit.
It really does. His entire professional career coincided almost perfectly with a 40-year generational collapse in interest rates, which mechanically caused bond prices to soar.
Right. As rates go down, bond prices go up.
So to Gross, bonds were the ultimate wealth-generating tool. But to his father's generation, who had their purchasing power incinerated by the high inflation of the 40s and 70s, bonds were seen as guaranteed wealth destroyers.
So when we extrapolate this out to the micro interactions in our own lives, it changes everything.
It really reframes everyday arguments.
Think about it. When you are sitting in a boardroom, arguing with your CFO about whether to leverage debt for a new acquisition, Or you're sitting at the kitchen table arguing with your spouse about whether to put your savings into an index fund or a high-yield savings account.
You aren't actually debating the math, are you?
No, you are debating the invisible economic weather of your respective childhoods.
That is so wild to think about.
You are projecting the trauma or the euphoria of your formative years onto a present-day spreadsheet.
But I have to push back here.
Go for it.
Because if our risk tolerance is fundamentally just the dumb luck of when and where we were born, that feels incredibly fatalistic.
I can see how it sounds that way.
Are we just walking, talking algorithms, playing out a script written for us by the decade we happen to turn 18?
It is not fatalistic, but it is illuminating. It demands a high degree of metacognition.
Meaning, we have to think about how we think.
Exactly. We spend immense amounts of societal energy judging people for their financial timidity or their recklessness. We label the cautious investor as a coward and the aggressive investor as a greedy gambler.
Right, we attach moral judgments to it.
But in reality, they are both just running the optimization software they were given by the macroeconomic universe of their youth.
So it's not about letting yourself off the hook.
No. Recognizing this doesn't excuse you from making bad choices, but it provides the self-awareness necessary to ask why your gut reaction is what it is, and then logically override it if necessary.
Okay, I can accept that generational anchoring explains differing tolerances for risk. It explains why my grandfather hoarded physical cash in a coffee can, and why my younger cousin is trading crypto options on leverage.
Extreme examples, but yes.
I get that. But what about decisions happening right now that seem objectively, universally, mathematically terrible?
You mean beyond just asset allocation?
Yeah. Generational anchoring explains a difference of opinion on stocks versus bonds. But how do we explain choices that make absolutely zero mathematical sense on paper, regardless of what year you were born?
You're referring to choices where the expected economic value is unequivocally negative.
Exactly. And the most staggering example provided in the text is the lottery.
Yes, the lottery.
I need you, the listener, to brace yourself for this statistic. Americans spend more money on lottery tickets than on movies, video games, music, sporting events, and books combined.
It is a colossal, multi-billion-dollar industry built almost entirely on statistical anomalies.
But here is the truly devastating part. The core demographic driving this industry, buying the vast majority of these tickets, are the lowest income households in the country.
The people who can least afford it.
They spend an average of $412 a year on lottery tickets. That is roughly 4 times the amount spent by the highest income groups.
And we have to cross-reference that with the emergency fund data.
Right. Nearly 40% of Americans cannot come up with $400 in an emergency without going into debt or selling something.
The overlap there is critical to understand.
The exact same demographic that cannot afford a $400 unexpected medical bill or a blown tire on their car is systematically blowing $400 a year on a 1 in a million chance to strike it rich.
It sounds paradoxical.
Now, as someone who values logic, I have to be blunt. I understand empathy, but I cannot let us off the hook that easily here. That behavior is mathematically suicidal.
It's objectively a bad bet.
It is toxic, predatory hope. How can we possibly defend that through the lens of behavioral logic? Empathy shouldn't mean we just excuse financially destructive behavior.
And this is where we have to separate economic utility from psychological utility.
What's the difference?
Well, you are looking at the lottery ticket through the lens of expected economic value. And you are correct. The math is abysmal. It's a tax on those who can't do math.
A heavy tax.
But remember, our foundational premise, no one is crazy. The people buying these tickets aren't stupid. They are optimizing for a different variable.
So what are they optimizing for? Walk with me through the psychological architecture of that decision.
Let's strip away the spreadsheet and look at their lived reality. Imagine you live strictly paycheck to paycheck.
Okay.
Your wages are stagnant, and your prospects for upward mobility are effectively zero. The traditional advice, just save 10% and invest in an index fund, feels completely out of reach when every dollar is spoken for by basic survival needs.
There's nothing left to save.
Exactly. You cannot afford a modest vacation, you drive a car that is constantly breaking down, you lack comprehensive health insurance, and buying a home in a safe neighborhood without taking on crippling debt is an absolute fantasy.
It's just a constant grind.
Meanwhile, you are bombarded every day by a culture that glorifies the wealthy people who enjoy these things effortlessly.
You are systematically locked out of the American dream.
Precisely. You are locked out. So when that person walks into a gas station and puts down $5 for a Powerball ticket, They are not making a mathematical investment.
They know they probably won't win.
They know. They are not calculating the statistical probability of a return on capital. What they are buying is a dream premium.
A dream premium. I like that.
For the 48 hours between buying the ticket and the drawing on Tuesday night, it provides a dopamine hit. It is the only moment in their highly restricted lives where they can hold a tangible, physical piece of the reality that wealthy people take for granted.
So they are buying hope.
Yes, they are paying a premium for a sliver of psychological relief from systemic hopelessness.
The author uses a quote that is an absolute gut punch. He says, "We are paying for a dream, and you may not understand that because you are already living a dream."
That quote shifts the entire paradigm.
It really makes you stop and think.
Is buying lotto tickets when you were broke a bad mathematical idea?
Yeah.
Yes, without question. But is the psychology driving it logically sound within their specific environmental context?
Entirely. Because it solves an immediate psychological problem.
Yes. Every financial decision a person makes checks the boxes they need to check in that specific localized moment. For you, the box might be prudent long-term wealth accumulation.
But for them,
For the low-income ticket buyer, the box is immediate psychological relief and a brief escape from despair.
so the golden rule we are distilling from this segment is essentially what you are doing seems crazy to me, but once I understand your constraints, I completely understand why you are doing it.
Exactly. It replaces judgment with curiosity.
Imagine actively applying this lens to corporate boardrooms, to salary negotiations, or even to your own marriage.
It would resolve so much conflict.
Right. How many brutal, exhausting arguments over money are actually just a complete failure to understand the other person's unique mental model of the world.
Most of them, I'd bet.
When your partner wants to drastically overspend on a house, maybe they aren't being financially irresponsible. Maybe they grew up housing insecure, moving apartments every 6 months, and they are subconsciously trying to purchase absolute safety at any cost.
And once you view their behavior through that empathetic framework, you can actually have a productive, healing conversation.
Instead of just yelling about the budget.
Exactly. Rather than just throwing aggressive spreadsheets at each other, you address the root psychological need, not just the symptomatic financial behavior.
Okay, so we've established that our individual, localized experiences heavily distort our financial behaviors. But the source material introduces a broader historical context that I found incredibly relieving.
Relief is a good word for it.
It actually alleviates a lot of the guilt we carry over our collective financial missteps. Because while money as an exchange medium is ancient, we can trace standardized coinage all the way back to King Aliats of Lydia in 600 BC. Modern consumer finance is essentially an infant.
It is brand new in the grand scheme of things.
We are quite literally financial toddlers operating machinery we don't understand.
This is perhaps the most overlooked reality in all of personal finance. We hold ourselves to this impossible standard, expecting perfection in a system that was essentially cobbled together yesterday.
We're too hard on ourselves.
From an evolutionary psychology standpoint, we're experiencing a massive environmental mismatch.
Let's focus deeply on the concept of retirement to prove this point.
Good example.
Today, U.S. retirement accounts hold something on the order of $27 trillion. The 401k is the undisputed engine of middle-class wealth creation.
Everyone talks about the 401k.
But the very concept that every single citizen deserves a dignified, multi-decade retirement funded by their own market investments is an incredibly novel sociological experiment.
People don't realize how new it is.
It's barely 2 generations old.
The historical reality is stark. Before World War II, the concept of retirement as a distinct phase of leisure simply did not exist for the average working-class person.
You just worked.
You worked until your body physically failed, and then you were cared for by your multi-generational family, or you died. That was the social contract.
It was brutal.
Even in the 1940s, the labor force participation rate of men over the age of 65 was well above 50%.
And they weren't working as greeters at Walmart for extra vacation money. They were doing hard labor just to survive.
Because they had to.
And what about Social Security? People often point to that as the great historical safety net. But let's look at the numbers. When Ida Mae Fuller cashed the very first monthly Social Security check in January 1940, it was for exactly $22.54.
Which was not a lot of money, even then.
Even adjusted for inflation, that was not funding a move to a Gulf community in Florida. Up until the late 1960s, well over a quarter of all Americans over 65 were living in absolute poverty.
And we also have to actively dismantle the myth of the private pension golden age.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought this up.
There is this deeply ingrained nostalgic narrative, the Mad Men era dream, that back in the good old days, every American man worked for a benevolent corporation for 40 years.
Right, received a gold watch and lived comfortably on a generous pension until he died.
The era of corporate paternalism.
But it's a myth, right?
The actual macroeconomic data tells a shockingly different story. In 1975, only 25% of people aged 65 or older had any pension income whatsoever.
Only a quarter of them.
Just a quarter. And among that lucky minority who did have a pension, it only accounted for about 15% of their total household income.
That is barely a safety net.
The golden age of the private pension is largely a statistical myth for the vast majority of the population. The burden of retirement has almost always fallen on the individual, but the tools to manage that burden are brand new.
So when did the specific system we have now actually start? The system we expect 22-year-olds to flawlessly navigate today.
This is the crazy part.
Get ready for this timeline. The 401k, the absolute backbone of American retirement savings, the vehicle we are all told is mandatory for survival, did not legally exist until Section 401k of the Revenue Act of 1978.
1978.
It was literally an obscure tax loophole that benefits consultants realized could be used to shift retirement risk from the employer to the employee.
It wasn't even designed for what it is today.
And the Roth IRA. It was born in 1998. If the Roth IRA were a human being, it would be a millennial currently complaining about its own student loans.
When you map out the timeline like that, you realize this extreme novelty applies to almost every facet of modern economic life.
What else is new?
Consider the economics of higher education. The share of Americans with a bachelor's degree jumped from 1 in 20 in 1940 to 1 in 4 by 2015.
That's a massive societal shift.
And over that exact same period, the inflation-adjusted cost of tuition rose fourfold. We shifted the primary mechanism for middle-class entry, the college degree, into a high-cost debt product.
But we didn't train anyone on how to use it.
Right, we didn't teach anyone how to manage that leverage. Is it any wonder we are facing a trillion-dollar student loan crisis? We are dealing with a massive sociological shift that happened decades faster than our cultural financial literacy could keep up.
And index funds. The thing every financial advisor tells you to buy, they are less than 50 years old.
Also brand new.
What about widespread consumer debt, like standard 30-year mortgages and ubiquitous credit cards? That only truly exploded after World War II, when the GI Bill essentially invented the modern American suburb and made it accessible for millions to borrow against their future labor.
Before that, you just saved up and bought things with cash.
The profound point the author is driving home is that there are no centuries of accumulated generational wisdom for us to draw upon here.
No ancient scrolls on how to manage a 401k.
We don't have deeply ingrained cultural heuristics for managing a self-directed stock portfolio. We are quite literally winging it.
We are playing a highly complex, high-stakes game where the rules, the instruments, and the penalties were written during our parents' lifetimes, or in many cases our own.
Which brings up the dog analogy from the text, which I think is the most mechanically sound way to understand this.
I love this analogy.
Dogs were domesticated roughly 10,000 years ago, yet despite millennia of selective breeding and living in temperature-controlled houses, they still retain wild evolutionary behaviors.
They act like wolves sometimes.
Right. Your golden retriever will still walk in circles on your living room rug before lying down because its brain is wired to press down tall grass in the wild to check for snakes.
It's just hardwired in.
Human beings have had a modern consumer financial system for barely 20 to 50 years, and yet we look at our own anxiety over a stock market dip and wonder why we aren't perfectly acclimated, emotionless, rational robots.
The expectation of perfect rationality in a completely novel environment is, ironically, the true irrationality.
We're expecting too much of ourselves.
We simply haven't had the evolutionary time to adapt our psychology to the realities of compound interest, or complex collateralized debt instruments, or algorithmic market trading.
Our brains are still out on the savannah.
Exactly. Our brains are wired to hunt, gather, and avoid immediate physical predators, not to calculate the 30-year opportunity cost of a high expense ratio on a mutual fund.
So doesn't this mean we need to extend a massive amount of grace to ourselves and honestly to our parents and grandparents?
Without a doubt.
We sit around and judge previous generations, or our past selves, for making suboptimal financial decisions. But we are essentially playing a highly complex video game where the mechanics were patched in yesterday and there was no tutorial.
Extending grace is the exact right psychological takeaway. Acknowledging our collective infancy in modern finance doesn't give you a free pass to engage in reckless behavior, but it explains the friction.
It takes the shame out of it.
Yes, it allows you to stop beating yourself up for not being a financial prodigy and instead start focusing on building simple, robust behavioral guardrails,
Like what?
like automating your investments to bypass your own emotional volatility. That can keep you safe while you slowly learn how to play the game.
That perfectly sets up our synthesis for today. We've covered an immense amount of ground, from hubristic tech executives to rural janitors, from the NBER generational data to the evolutionary mismatch of the 401k.
We really have covered a lot.
Let's tie this entire deep dive together into one clear, memorable insight for our listeners.
If there is a central soul to this chapter in this discussion, it is financial success is not a hard science to be conquered with a mathematical formula.
It's not physics.
It is a soft skill governed entirely by human behavior. Whether you are a brilliant tech executive throwing gold coins in the ocean to soothe a fragile ego, a humble janitor quietly compounding millions through unyielding patience, or a person living in poverty buying a lottery ticket just to feel a fleeting glimmer of hope.
Your actions make complete logical sense inside your own head.
Exactly. We are all navigating a brand new, historically unprecedented financial landscape, and we are doing it while looking through the tiny, heavily biased peephole of our own uniquely lived experiences.
We're all just trying to make the world make sense with the highly localized, imperfect data we have.
That's the human condition.
And before we go, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought that builds on everything we've discussed today.
Give them something to chew on.
We've established that human emotion and biological bias are the greatest liabilities in modern finance. So naturally, the modern financial industry is currently trying to solve this by removing the human entirely.
Through automation.
We are entering the age of AI-driven portfolios and algorithmic trading. Machines designed to execute without fear, greed, or generational trauma.
Sounds perfect on paper.
But here's the question you need to ask yourself. If algorithms are trained on historical market data, and historical market data is entirely a record of human panic, euphoria, and irrational behavior, are we actually removing emotion from finance?
Oh, that's a chilling thought.
Or are we simply building supercomputers that will execute our innate psychological biases at light speed, creating market crashes that happen in milliseconds instead of months?
That is the defining question of the next era of finance.
Identifying the ghost in the machine is one thing. Making sure we don't accidentally give it superintelligence is another. Now that we know why we behave the way we do, we have to look at the invisible external forces that dictate the actual outcomes of those behaviors, regardless of our intentions.
The things outside our control.
Next time, we'll dive into the sibling forces that silently pull the strings of every success and failure in the world, luck and risk, and we'll discover why nothing is ever quite as good or quite as bad as it seems.
Can't wait.
Until then, remember, the spreadsheet only tells half the story. The rest is just human nurture.
What if the line between a visionary billionaire and a bankrupt criminal is just a coin flip?
You know, it sounds almost cynical when you first hear it. But when you actually look at the math behind how people acquire massive wealth, the difference between ending up on the cover of Forbes or in a jail cell often comes down to things completely outside of their control.
And that completely upends how we usually think about success. Because, I mean, we absolutely love to study successful people.
We really do.
We want to figure out their secret. Like, I know I do it all the time. You go to the bookstore, and entire walls are dedicated to biographies of these titans of industry.
Oh yeah, hundreds of them.
We read their interviews, we obsess over their habits, we try to mimic their morning routines or, their diets. But reading through our sources for today really struck me.
What did you notice?
What if the secret wasn't their relentless work ethic? What if the secret was this quiet, invisible force that most of us are just, too proud to acknowledge?
That is exactly what we are getting into today.
Because we are looking at a reality today that shifts the ground right under your feet.
Yeah.
It fundamentally changed how I judge both my own failures and other people's massive successes. And I think it will do the exact same for anyone listening.
So today, we are taking a deep dive into the intertwined forces of luck and risk. We're going to examine why nothing in business, finance, or even life in general is ever quite as good or as bad as it seems.
Which is such a powerful idea.
It really is. And for anyone out there who is interested in entrepreneurship or building wealth or just making better decisions, This exploration is crucial because it reveals why studying extreme success can actually ruin your financial strategy.
Wait, ruin it?
Completely ruin it. And more importantly, we'll talk about how you can spot the broad, reliable patterns that you can actually use.
Okay, so to start us off, the source material frames luck and risk as siblings, like they're two sides of the exact same coin.
Right.
The core concept here is that every single outcome in your life is guided by forces other than just your individual effort.
Which is a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people.
It is. But when you actually pause and visualize that, it makes complete sense. I mean, you are just one person in a game being played by 7 billion other people.
Exactly. 7 billion moving parts.
Right. The board has an infinite number of moving parts.
And we have this tendency to view our lives as a closed system. Like,
Yeah.
we want to believe that our inputs directly equal our outputs.
Like a math equation.
Yeah, exactly. If I work hard, I get rich. If I'm smart, I succeed.
Right.
But the reality is that the accidental impact of actions completely outside of your control can often be vastly more consequential than the conscious, deliberate decisions you make.
Which is wild to think about.
The world is simply too complex to allow 100% of your actions to dictate 100% of your outcomes.
But wait, let me push back on that for a second.
Sure.
Because if I'm listening to this, a part of me is probably thinking, well, isn't that just a convenient excuse for people who don't want to work hard?
Ah, I see what you mean.
It feels like it could be a cop-out. Like if my business fails, I can just throw my hands up and say, oh, well, it was the 7 billion other people, just bad luck.
Right.
So where do we draw the line between acknowledging this complexity and just like giving up on personal responsibility?
And that is the exact tension that makes this so difficult to talk about. Acknowledging luck and risk does not mean that hard work and skill don't matter.
Okay.
They absolutely matter. Effort is basically the price of admission just to get on the playing field.
Like you can't even play the game without it.
Exactly. If you don't work hard, your chances of success are basically zero. But the point the sources are making is that effort alone does not guarantee the outcome.
I see.
Two people can put in the exact same amount of grueling, relentless hard work. One might experience a massive tailwind of luck, and the other might get hit by an invisible headwind of risk.
Wow. So the effort was identical, but the invisible forces were different.
Precisely.
Which brings us to one of the most fascinating illustrations of this from the reading. And I really want to set the scene for this because it honestly blew my mind.
It's a great story.
The year is 1968. We are in Seattle, Washington. And I want to introduce you to a man named Bill Dougal.
A very important figure.
Yeah, he was a World War II Navy pilot who became a high school math and science teacher at a place called Lakeside School.
Right.
And Dougal had this incredible foresight. He believed that traditional book study just wasn't enough without real-world experience. So somehow, in 1968, he realized that his students were going to need to know something about computers when they eventually got to college.
And to put that in context, we really have to remember what 1968 looked like technologically.
Oh, it was a totally different world.
Completely.
Right.
The very concept of computer time-sharing had only been invented in 1965. Computers at this time were not, things you put on a desk in your bedroom.
Right, they were massive.
They were the size of entire rooms. They were incredibly expensive, finicky, and mostly reserved for elite military operations or massive university research labs.
So not exactly accessible to a teenager.
Not at all. Most university graduate schools didn't have advanced computing access, let alone high school.
Right, so Dougal, this visionary teacher, he petitions the Lakeside School Mothers Club. He asks to use the proceeds from their annual rummage sale, which was about $3,000.
Which was a lot of money back then.
A ton of money.
Yeah.
He uses it to lease a teletype Model 30 computer that was hooked up to a General Electric mainframe terminal. Now, I know there is some wild statistical context to just how rare this was. Like, how unlikely was it for a kid in 1968 to have access to this?
The math is staggering. It really is. So if you look at the global data from 1968, the United Nations estimates there were roughly 303 million high school-age people in the entire world.
Okay, 303 million.
Yes. Now let's narrow that down. About 18 million of those high school-age kids lived in the United States.
Getting smaller.
Narrow it down further. About 270,000 of them lived in Washington state. A little over 100,000 lived in the Seattle area.
Okay.
And out of that entire global population of 303 million kids, only about 300 of them attended Lakeside School.
That is just, it's insane. You start with 303 million, you end with 300. A literal 1 in a million head start.
A 1 in a million stroke of luck.
And of course, one of those 8th graders who suddenly had a state-of-the-art computer dropped into his lap was Bill Gates.
Right.
He met his classmate, Paul Allen, and because this was an independent study program, they weren't just like taking a rigid class. They could just toy away with this machine at their leisure.
Which was so crucial.
Yeah, after school, late at night, on the weekends, they were experimenting, failing, and learning the architecture of computing before almost anyone else their age even knew what a computer was.
And that unstructured time is really the key. Because during one of those late night sessions, Paul Allen actually showed Gates a Fortune magazine.
Oh, I remember reading this part.
Yeah, he asked him what he thought it would be like to run a Fortune 500 company. And Gates replied, maybe we'll have our own computer company someday.
Just a couple of kids dreaming big.
Exactly. And to his immense credit, Gates is not shy about the role luck played here. When he spoke to the school's graduating class in 2005, he flat out told them if there had been no Lakeside, there would have been no Microsoft.
Which is such a remarkable admission of luck from one of the most successful men in history.
It really is. Because we have to hold two truths in our head at the same time here.
Right.
Bill Gates is staggeringly smart. He is incredibly hardworking. He possessed a vision for the future of personal computing that even seasoned adult computer executives of that era completely failed to grasp.
Right, he was brilliant.
But he also had that 1 in a million luck. The hard work and the luck are permanently intertwined.
They really are.
But to truly understand the depth of this dynamic, we have to look at the tragic doppelganger to this story.
Oh, man, yeah.
We have to look at the risk side of that exact same coin.
The other sibling. I have to admit, reading this part of the source material actually made me stop and just stare at the wall for a minute.
It's a very heavy story.
It is, because everyone knows the names Bill Gates and Paul Allen. But back at Lakeside, there was a third member of this gang of high school computer prodigies.
Right.
His name was Kent Evans.
Yes, Kent Evans. He and Bill Gates became best friends in the 8th grade. And by Gates's own account, Kent was the best student in the class.
Wow, even better than Gates.
Apparently so. They were inseparable. They talked on the phone constantly. Gates actually mentioned in a documentary years later that he still knows Kent's childhood phone number by heart.
5257851.
Exactly.
Let's just pause on that for a second. The fact that a billionaire in his 60s still instantly recalls the 7 digits of his middle school best friend's phone number.
It tells you a lot.
It really shows you how deeply connected they were. They weren't just casual classmates, they were kindred spirits.
They absolutely were. And Kent was every bit as skilled with computers as Gates and Allen.
Really?
Oh, yeah. In fact, when Lakeside School was struggling to manually put together the school's class schedule, which is, a massive, complex logistical puzzle,
I can only imagine.
they literally tasked these children, Bill and Kent, to build a computer program to solve the problem.
That's wild. The school asked the kids to do it.
And they did. It worked. But beyond just the technical skills, Kent shared Bill's business mind. He shared that endless ambition.
Gates remembers Kent always carrying around a big briefcase like a lawyer.
Right. They were teenagers constantly scheming about the future. They would debate what they were going to be. Should they be CEOs? Should they be generals? Ambassadors?
Just massive dreams.
The one thing they knew for certain was that whatever they did, they were going to do it together. Gates has said he is absolutely sure they would have gone to college together.
Wow.
When you look at the trajectory, Kent Evans could have very well been a founding partner of Microsoft. He had the same drive, the same brains, and the same 1 in a million exposure to that computer.
But he wasn't a founding partner.
No. Kent died in a mountaineering accident before he even graduated high school.
It's just devastating. A
Yeah.
kid with the whole world in front of him. And when you look at the statistics of that happening, how rare is that kind of tragedy?
The statistics are chillingly symmetrical.
Really?
Yeah. Every year, there are around 36 mountaineering deaths in the entire United States. The odds of a high school student being killed on a mountain are roughly 1 in a million.
Wow. That is heavy. So you have Bill Gates, who experienced 1 in a million luck by ending up at Lakeside with that computer.
Right.
And his best friend, Ken Evans, experienced 1 in a million risk by stepping onto that mountain.
Exactly. It is the exact same magnitude of force working in completely opposite directions.
That is profound.
The sources use this to make a really profound point. For every Bill Gates, there is a Kent Evans. Someone who is just as skilled, just as driven, who put in the exact same amount of effort, but who simply ended up on the other side of life's roulette wheel.
It feels a bit like walking into a massive casino. Well, imagine you are standing there.
Mm-hmm.
and you watch someone hit the multi-million-dollar jackpot on a slot machine. The bells are ringing, the lights are flashing,
Right, everyone's cheering.
and instead of acknowledging that a random number generator buried deep inside a silicon chip
Hmm.
just happened to align the symbols at the exact microsecond they pulled the handle, you look at the winner and say, wow, they must have a vastly superior, highly technical lever pulling technique.
Oh, I love that analogy. That's perfect.
We completely ignore the internal invisible mechanisms of the machine itself, and we attribute the entire outcome to the person's physical action.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. We are so focused on the lever pulling, the hard work, the morning routines, the
On
habit.
it's stuff we can see.
Exactly. We focus on that, and we ignore the algorithm of chance running in the background. And the reason this matters to you, the listener, is that it should fundamentally shift how you view your own outcomes.
Because you aren't the only one pulling the levers.
Right. When you are planning your business, your career, or your financial future, you have to respect that the world is simply too complex for you to control every single variable.
But practically speaking, how does someone actually do that?
What do you mean?
Well, because it's one thing to say, respect the complexity, but if I'm sitting down to map out my financial goals,
Yeah.
how do I apply the lesson of the slot machine or the lesson of Kent Evans?
Okay. It comes down to separating process from outcome.
Process from outcome.
Yes, you can control the process. You control how much you save, how hard you study your market, how ethically you treat your customers, how diversified your portfolio is.
So that is my lever pulling technique.
Exactly, that's your technique. You make it as flawless as possible, but you have to emotionally detach from the short-term outcome because the outcome is influenced by the algorithm of the casino.
Yeah, invisible forces.
Right. If you do everything right and still fail, it doesn't necessarily mean your process was flawed. It might just mean you hit a pocket of risk.
That makes a lot of sense.
You have to build a life where a bad outcome doesn't emotionally or financially destroy you. That way, you can keep pulling the lever with a good process until the odds turn in your favor.
Which transitions us perfectly into a really uncomfortable question.
Oh, let's hear it.
If the impact of luck and risk is this powerful,
Yeah.
and if it's that obvious when we look at extreme cases like Gates and Evans, why do we never talk about it?
It's a great question.
Right. Logically, you and I and everyone listening, we know luck exists. We aren't denying its existence. Yet our brains violently resist factoring it in. We just prefer these clean, simple stories of cause and effect.
We crave narrative simplicity. Our brains are basically meaning-making machines, and random chance just doesn't provide satisfying meaning.
It's too messy.
Exactly. The resistance to acknowledging luck comes from deep social and psychological friction.
Social friction, how so?
Well, think about it socially. When you are looking at someone else's massive success, say a colleague who just sold their startup for $50 million,
Okay, sure.
pointing out that they got lucky feels incredibly rude. It comes across as jealous, petty, and mean-spirited.
Oh, totally. You sound like a hater.
Exactly. You can't just walk up to them and say, hey, great job getting lucky.
No, absolutely not.
And conversely, think about it psychologically when evaluating yourself.
Okay.
When you have achieved a hard-fought success, admitting that it was largely due to luck feels deeply demoralizing.
Oh, that makes sense. It strips away your pride.
Right. You want to believe you earned every single penny through your own sweat and tears.
So because acknowledging luck makes us look bitter when judging others and feel diminished when judging ourselves, we default to this polite, unspoken social agreement.
Precisely. We just implicitly ignore luck as a factor altogether.
Which is wild when you consider what the actual experts, like the people who study this for a living, have to say about it.
Oh, definitely.
The source material brings up Robert Shiller. This is a man who literally won the Nobel Prize in economics.
A giant in the field.
Yeah. He has dedicated his life to understanding markets. And when someone asked him what he most wants to know about investing that we can't currently know, his answer was brilliant.
What did he say?
He said he wants to know, quote, the exact role of luck in successful outcomes.
Wow.
Right? If a Nobel laureate is admitting that the role of luck is the great unmeasurable mystery of economics, why are the rest of us so incredibly confident we have it all figured out?
Because the alternative requires confronting some incredibly uncomfortable realities about the idea of meritocracy.
Ooh, meritocracy, that's a loaded word.
It is. We want to believe that the economy is this perfect scale that weighs your effort and then hands you proportional wealth.
Right.
To see how deeply ingrained this is, let's look at the study by economist Bhaskar Mazumdar that was highlighted in the text.
Okay.
He researched socioeconomic mobility and found something absolutely fascinating. Incomes among brothers are actually more correlated than height or weight.
That statistic stopped me in my tracks when I read it.
It's hard to process at first,
Oh,
right?
no.
Statistically, if you are rich and tall, your brother is more likely to also be rich than he is to also be tall.
That is just insane.
Now, intuitively, we understand the mechanics of why this is true. The socioeconomic status of your parents dictates an enormous amount of your baseline reality.
Sure, it dictates the quality of the local public school you attend,
Right, the vocabulary used at your dinner table,
the stress levels in your home.
your baseline nutrition, and the social networks your parents can tap into to get you that crucial first internship.
Right, that's that invisible tailwind we were talking about.
Yes, but as the source notes, if you go out into the real world and find two highly successful, wealthy brothers, you will almost certainly find two men who do not believe this study's findings apply to them.
Oh, I bet.
They will attribute their shared success to their shared work ethic, their shared grit, and the values their parents instilled in them. They will almost never attribute it to their shared socioeconomic luck.
And honestly, I get it. It's human nature to want to take credit for your wins.
Of course it is.
But here is where the reading really challenged me. It pointed out this massive double standard, like this total hypocrisy in how we view failure versus how we view success.
The double standard is huge.
Think about it. When we look out into the world and see a business fail or an investment go to zero, what is the immediate narrative?
We assume the founder was lazy.
Exactly. Or we assume they didn't think their strategy through, or they just made flat-out bad, incompetent choices.
We blame them entirely.
Right. We attribute their failure entirely to their internal decisions.
Uh-huh.
But when we fail, when our investment tanks,
The narrative changes entirely.
completely, we make up these wild, elaborate stories. We say, well, I was blindsided by unpredictable macroeconomic risk.
Or it was a black swan event.
Right. Or the market dynamics were just unfair. We never say we were lazy or stupid.
No, never. It is the ultimate psychological defense mechanism. It's actually known as the fundamental attribution error.
The fundamental attribution error.
Right. When we judge others, a clean story of cause and effect makes perfect sense to us because we cannot see the invisible risks they faced. All we see is the bad outcome.
Okay, I see.
So we conclude, well, you had a bad outcome, therefore you made a bad decision.
That makes sense.
But when judging ourselves, we have the full, vivid context of our own intentions. We know how hard we tried.
We know how late we stayed up working on it.
Exactly. We know how much research we did. So we easily justify our past decisions as sound, and we blame the bad outcome on unpredictable external risk.
And the media landscape completely reinforces this delusion.
Oh, 100%.
Think about the covers of Forbes magazine or Fortune or any major business publication. They never, ever run a cover story celebrating the poor, unknown investor who made a brilliant, mathematically sound, perfectly rational decision, but who just happened to get hit by the unforgiving side of risk and lost their money.
Never.
Right.
Because a story about someone doing everything right and still failing isn't inspiring.
It's depressing.
It doesn't sell magazines.
Exactly. But they constantly, endlessly celebrate the wealthy investor who made a completely reckless, highly dangerous, irrational decision, but who just happened to get lucky and made billions.
All the time.
They put him on the cover in a nice suit, photograph them with their arms crossed, and call them a genius visionary.
Because in both scenarios, those investors flipped the exact same coin. It just landed on a different side.
Wow.
But the magazine and society at large only rewards the outcome. We completely ignore the process. We just worship the survivor.
It reminds me of a thought experiment. If you were to ask someone right now to name 10 billionaires who got to where they are purely by chance, they probably couldn't do it.
No way.
And even if they could think of a few names, they could never say it to those people's faces without sounding incredibly bitter and resentful.
It would be so awkward.
We literally lack the social vocabulary to discuss luck politely in a capitalist society.
We do. And the danger here isn't just an abstract philosophical problem. The danger is deeply practical for you, the listener.
How so?
We are all actively trying to learn about what works and what doesn't with money. We are observing these successes and failures in the world and saying to ourselves, I should do what she did, and I should avoid what he did.
Right. We're trying to find a blueprint.
Exactly. But without a magic wand to perfectly separate what was a repeatable, learnable skill from what was random luck or risk, identifying the traits we should actually emulate is agonizingly hard.
That is so true.
If you emulate someone who just got lucky, you are going to walk right off a cliff.
So when I read this, I realized I had to completely change how I view my own financial planning. But I want to ask you, as someone who synthesizes this kind of research, what is the practical takeaway for a listener who has maybe had some financial setbacks?
The takeaway is profoundly liberating, actually. You need to forgive yourself for your past financial failures.
Just forgive yourself.
Yes. Failure is often a lousy teacher because it seduces really smart people into thinking their decisions were terrible.
Right.
When in reality, they might have made a perfectly sound decision that just happened to hit the unforgiving side of risk. You have to stop beating yourself up.
That takes so much pressure off, honestly. But moving forward, how do we protect ourselves from that risk? If we can't predict it, what do we do?
You do it by building a margin of safety.
A margin of safety.
Yes. You have to arrange your financial life with enough of a cushion, like enough room for error, so that a single bad outcome doesn't wipe you out completely.
What does that cushion actually look like in practice, though?
It looks like avoiding the extremes of leverage. It means not putting all of your money into a single speculative stock, no matter how confident you are.
Okay, that makes sense.
It means maintaining an emergency fund so that if you lose your job, you aren't forced to sell your long-term investments at a loss just to pay rent.
Right.
It's about psychological pacing as much as financial pacing. You want to build a system that ensures you stay in the game.
Stay in the game.
Because if risk wipes you out entirely, if you experience total ruin, you can't play anymore. But if you have a cushion, you can absorb the blow, stay at the table, and let the odds eventually fall your way over a long timeline.
I love that. Stay at the table. Which actually leads us perfectly into a really crucial part of the source material.
Oh, the hindsight bias part.
Yes. This is where we tackle the danger of extreme examples. The concept here is terrifyingly simple. The line between inspiringly bold and foolishly reckless is about a millimeter thick.
A very, very thin line.
And the kicker is, it is only visible when you are looking backwards in hindsight.
Exactly.
Because risk and luck are so hard to pin down, studying extreme outliers, like those billionaires on the magazine covers, is actually incredibly dangerous for the average person trying to learn how to build wealth.
It is dangerous because extreme outcomes are, by definition, influenced by extreme ends of luck and risk.
Right.
You cannot reliably extract a repeatable lesson from a statistical anomaly.
Which brings us to Cornelius Vanderbilt. I found this story incredible.
It's a classic example.
So, Vanderbilt is building his massive railroad empire in the 19th century. And at one point, one of his advisors comes to him in a panic. The advisor points out that essentially every single transaction Vanderbilt is agreeing to is actually breaking the law.
And Vanderbilt's response perfectly captures his mindset.
Right. He famously says, "My God, John, you don't suppose you can run a railroad in accordance with the statutes of the state of New York, do you?"
Just completely dismissive.
He also supposedly asked, "What do I care about the law? Ain't I got the power?" He flagrantly, openly, and aggressively broke the laws.
Now, analyze how history remembers him. Today, we praise Vanderbilt as this scrappy, unstoppable visionary.
Oh, absolutely. He's an icon.
The historical narrative is that he didn't let outdated bureaucratic laws stand in the way of innovation and progress. He is a titan of American capitalism.
Right.
But think about how millimeter thin that narrative really is.
Okay.
If the political winds had blown slightly differently, if his company had simply been shut down by a light-forgiving court system, or if a different politician had been in power.
Oh, wow. We would not study him as a visionary. We would study him as a cautionary tale of a criminal whose hubris and blatant law-breaking ruined his own empire.
It's the Enron contrast. We praise Vanderbilt for flouting the law with the exact same passion that we criticize the executives at Enron for doing the exact same thing.
The exact same behavior.
The only difference is the outcome. Vanderbilt won, so he's a genius. Enron lost, so they are villains.
Precisely.
And he isn't the only historical threat like this. The text mentions John D. Rockefeller.
Oh, another great example.
At one point, a judge literally called Rockefeller's company no better than a common thief because of how frequently he circumvented the law.
Wow.
Yet today, his name is basically synonymous with business genius.
Because history is written by the survivors.
Right.
The survivor's bias cleans up all the messy, risky realities of how they actually achieve their success.
But let's bring it into the modern era because the sources touch on this too, and I think it's something we can all relate to a bit more.
Sure, let's hear it. Think about Mark Zuckerberg. In 2006, Yahoo offered to buy Facebook for $1 billion.
A massive offer at the time.
Zuckerberg turned it down.
Yeah.
Now, hindsight has completely sanitized that decision. Today, everyone looks at Facebook's trillion-dollar valuation and says, what a genius. He saw the future. He stuck to his guns.
Right. He's a visionary.
But then look at Yahoo. During that same era, they turned down a massive buyout offer from Microsoft.
Oh, I remember that.
And the historical verdict on them, what fools. They were arrogant. They should have cashed out while they could.
Just completely different narratives based on the outcome.
So if I'm an entrepreneur listening to this, what is the actual lesson here? When the giant company comes with a massive check, should I turn down the $1 billion like Zuckerberg? Or should I take it because I don't want to end up like Yahoo?
That is the perfect question. And the frustrating answer is you cannot draw a clear, universally applicable lesson from either of those stories. No. The decisions were made in a fog of uncertainty. The outcomes were entirely dictated by the invisible doppelgangers of luck and risk.
Wow.
Zuckerberg's refusal could have easily destroyed his company if a new competitor had emerged a month later. Yahoo's refusal could have been genius if their next product launch had revolutionized the internet.
That is so true.
You're trying to find a formula for success in a place where only probability exists.
And what absolutely blew my mind is that this doesn't just apply to tech startups or wild railroad barons.
Oh, no.
It even applies to the most rigid, mathematical, conservative corners of finance. The reading brings up Benjamin Graham.
The legend himself.
For anyone who doesn't know, Benjamin Graham is the absolute father of value investing. He's the man who mentored Warren Buffett.
Yes.
He literally wrote the definitive canonical texts on diversification, margin of safety, and safe, calculated investing.
The intelligent investor. It is basically the Bible of conservative finance.
Right. And the irony here is supreme. When you actually look at the math behind Benjamin Graham's massive lifetime investing success, the vast majority of his wealth was not due to a perfectly balanced, diversified portfolio that followed his own rules.
No, it wasn't.
It was due to owning an enormous chunk of one single stock, Geico.
Exactly. Graham made an incredibly concentrated, highly aggressive bet on Geico. By his own admission, that single investment broke nearly every fundamental rule of diversification and safety that he himself had laid out in his famous texts.
He broke his own rules. The guy who wrote the rule book got rich by tearing out the chapter on diversification.
He really did. And to Graham's profound credit, he had the humility to question it later in life.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, he wrote about the massive Geico bonanza, and he asked a rhetorical question. He wrote, "One lucky break or one supremely shrewd decision, can we tell them apart?"
And what did he say?
His answer was, not easily.
Man. So let me ask you the tough question then. If I go to the bookstore right now and I buy a biography of a famous billionaire or a massive tech founder, am I wasting my time?
Well,
Am I basically just reading the diary of a lottery winner who has convinced themselves that they bought the winning ticket using a superior, highly intellectual strategy? Are these books completely useless?
they aren't completely useless as entertainment or, even as motivation.
Okay, fair.
But as financial blueprints, in many cases, yes, they are highly misleading.
Oh,
The general rule of thumb you should internalize is this. The more extreme the outcome, the less likely you can apply its lessons to your own life.
that makes total sense.
Trying to emulate Warren Buffett's investment success is incredibly hard because his results are so extreme that the role of luck in his lifetime performance is very likely high. And you simply cannot reliably emulate luck.
So what are we supposed to do? If we can't study the billionaires, do we just throw our hands up and guess?
Not at all. The practical takeaway here is a shift in focus. You have to be incredibly careful who you praise and equally careful who you look down upon.
Okay.
You have to stop trying to emulate the extreme outliers. Instead, what you want to do is look for broad, common patterns of success and failure. The more common the pattern, the more applicable it might be to your own life.
Can you give me an example of what studying a broad pattern looks like compared to studying an outlier?
Absolutely. The source text mentions a man named Frederick Lewis Allen.
Okay.
He was an historian, but unlike most historians who spend their entire careers studying presidents and four-star generals and extreme outliers,
It's famous people, right?
right, Allen spent his career studying the median average American. He looked at how they lived, what they did for work, how their habits changed over decades, what they ate.
Just everyday people.
Exactly. And the argument is that there are far more relevant, actionable lessons to be found in studying those broad societal patterns than in studying the daily routine of a single billionaire.
So instead of asking, what time does Elon Musk wake up, we should be asking broader questions about human behavior.
Exactly. For example, a broad, heavily researched pattern we can observe across thousands of people is that individuals who have control over their own time.
Control over their time, okay.
Yeah. People who dictate when they work, where they work, and who they work with, they tend to be significantly happier in life than those who don't, regardless of their absolute income level.
Wow.
That is a broad, reliable pattern. You can actually build a tangible financial strategy around that goal, saving to buy yourself freedom and time.
Because it's actually achievable.
Exactly, it's actionable. Trying to perfectly time the stock market to become a billionaire because a hedge fund manager wrote a book about it, that is not actionable.
Wow. Okay, when I try to synthesize all of this, the story of Bill Gates and Ken Evans, the invisible tailwind of luck, the hypocrisy of howittage failure, and the danger of extreme examples. What is the connective tissue here? What is the soul of this chapter?
If there's one sentence that captures the essence of this entire exploration, it is a quote referenced in the text from NYU professor Scott Galloway.
What's the quote?
He says, "Nothing is as good or as bad as it seems."
Nothing is as good or as bad as it seems.
Right. True financial wisdom isn't about chasing the lightning strikes of extreme outliers. And it certainly isn't about beating yourself up over unpredictable failures when things go wrong.
The balance.
It is. True wisdom is about respecting the messy, invisible forces of chance. It is about deliberately leaving room for error in your financial planning, building that margin of safety so you don't get wiped out.
Stay at the table.
Exactly. And ultimately, it is about recognizing that we are all just playing a wildly complex game with 7 billion other people where we only control a fraction of the pieces.
It is a deeply humbling realization. And if you, listening to this, start to genuinely accept how much your own success is completely out of your hands, it raises a profoundly uncomfortable question.
It does.
How do you define what you actually deserve in this life? Are your current financial goals built on an illusion of control? That is something that will fundamentally change how you interact with money, and it's something you are going to have to mull over on your own.
And speaking of those financial goals and the psychology behind them, what happens when someone actually catches that lightning in a bottle?
Oh, that's a good question.
What happens when they make millions of dollars, achieve the dream, and still decide it just isn't enough? Next time, we're taking a deep dive into the dark side of ambition.
I can't wait.
We'll explore the stories of two wildly successful men who pushed their luck right over the edge of a cliff.
Why does a guy who, literally sits on the board of Goldman Sachs with $100 million in the bank walk out of a completely confidential meeting and immediately make a wildly illegal phone call just to secure a few extra dollars?
Right. Makes no sense.
Exactly. It makes absolutely 0 sense on paper. I mean, it's not just a rhetorical puzzle for us to think about. It is a terrifying psychological trap.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you look at a guy who has definitively won the ultimate capitalist game, right? He has wealth that most people, we can't even fathom it.
Yeah, it's beyond comprehension for normal people.
Right. And yet he voluntarily detonates his entire life, his reputation, his freedom, everything, for something he objectively does not need.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. So today's deep dive is into Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money. Specifically, we're looking at the chapter titled Never Enough.
It's such a crucial chapter.
It really is. We are going to deconstruct this whole phenomenon. We're looking at the actual mechanics of financial self-sabotage and the really strange reality that the ultimate financial flex isn't actually having a billion-dollar net worth.
Right. It's not the number.
Exactly. It's mastering a single, highly counterintuitive concept.
Yeah, and the mission here really is to map out the exact boundary line where ambition just kind of curdles into destruction.
Curdles into destruction. I like that.
Well, it's true, right? House's whole premise in this chapter is that this insatiable appetite for more is honestly the quickest path to absolute ruin.
Regardless of how smart you are.
Exactly, regardless of your intelligence or, your market acumen. Like, for anyone listening who is operating in business or investing or, frankly, just any competitive field, understanding the psychology of satisfaction isn't just some, SOG philosophical luxury.
Right, it's not just self-help stuff.
No, not at all. It is a hard mathematical competitive advantage. It's really the only structural framework that allows you to accumulate wealth without losing your mind or your legacy or your autonomy in the process.
I mean, I want to dig straight into the mechanics of that destruction because more is universally treated as the default metric of success.
Oh, 100%. It's the engine of the whole system.
Right, like every quarterly earnings report is just screaming more. But when Housel breaks down the danger of moving goalposts, he uses the story of Rajat Gupta.
Which is just a fascinating story.
It really perfectly isolates the psychology of a man whose goalposts completely detached from reality. So let's look at the baseline context of Gupta's life, because I think it makes his eventual downfall so much more confusing.
Yeah, you have to understand where he started. I mean, Gupta's origin story is kind of the archetype of the impossible ascent.
Right.
He was born in Kolkata, India. He was orphaned as a teenager. So he had literally no safety net, no generational wealth, no institutional leverage at all.
Like he wasn't even starting on third base.
No, he was in a completely different zip code than the baseball stadium.
Wow. Yeah.
But yet, through just sheer intellect and drive, he builds this absolute empire. He becomes the CEO of McKinsey and Company, which is, arguably the most prestigious consulting firm in the entire world.
Oh, definitely. It's legendary.
Right. And he retires with an estimated net worth of somewhere around $100 million.
$100 million.
Yeah. And then he takes seats on the boards of Procter & Gamble and Goldman Sachs. He is literally rubbing shoulders with heads of state and the world's most powerful philanthropists.
So by any rational standard, any standard at all, the game is over.
Oh, he won. He beat the game.
He has $100 million. The yield on that alone funds multiple generations of his family. But he didn't stop playing.
No, he couldn't stop.
So we get to 2008, the height of the financial crisis. He's on this Goldman Sachs board call, and he learns that Warren Buffett is about to inject $5 billion into the bank.
Which at the time was an absolute massive lifeline for Goldman.
Right. It was huge news. And Gupta hangs up the phone, and exactly 16 seconds later, he calls a hedge fund manager named Raj Rajaratnam to pass on this insider information.
16 seconds.
16 seconds. That is the entire window between acquiring privileged information and executing a felony.
So fast.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the question Housel forces us to ask here is, what is happening in the human brain during those 16 seconds?
Yeah, because it definitely wasn't about survival.
Right. And it wasn't even about lifestyle enhancement. $100 million already buys you literally anything the material world has to offer.
Anything. You can have the yachts, the houses, whatever.
Exactly. So the mechanism at play here is that Gupta's expectations had completely decouples from his results.
Yeah, that's the core of it.
Modern capitalism is basically this dual-engine system. It generates immense wealth, yes, but it simultaneously generates immense envy.
Oh, the envy is real.
And the drive that pulled Gupta out of Kolkata, that survival instinct, it was the exact same drive that pushed him into a federal prison because he never developed a braking system.
Right. The ambition just kept increasing exponentially, but his actual satisfaction remained totally flat.
It's like downloading a software update for your phone, right? An update that promises better performance, but it intentionally drains your battery at twice the speed.
That is a great analogy.
Because the baseline requirements to just feel normal or feel successful, they've been artificially inflated. Every single time Gupta achieved a new level of wealth or status, his internal baseline just recalibrated to that new normal.
Yeah, it's hedonic adaptation happening in real time.
Hedonic adaptation, exactly.
Because when your baseline shifts up, that dopamine hit you used to get from your current status, it just evaporates.
It's just gone. You don't feel it anymore.
Right. You're literally biologically programmed to seek the delta, the difference between where you are right now and where you could potentially be.
Right.
So for someone in Gupta's position, who is suddenly surrounded by actual billionaires, being a mere centimillionaire suddenly felt like a form of poverty.
That is insane to think about. $100 million feeling like poverty.
But relative to his new peer group, it did. One step forward in actual wealth basically pushed his psychological goalpost 2 steps ahead.
See, I'm struggling with the cultural application of this, though.
Okay, how so?
Well, if we completely internalize this idea of the moving goalpost being super dangerous, aren't we just pathologizing ambition?
That's a fair question.
Because ambition is the literal fuel of capitalism. We celebrate the founders who refused to stop, right? The visionaries who are perpetually dissatisfied with the status quo.
Yeah, we idolize them.
So at what precise point does ambition cross the line from being this, societal good into a toxic individual lack of satisfaction?
Well, I mean, that is the defining tension of the entire chapter. Ambition is a utility. It drives innovation, it drives progress, cures for diseases, all of it. The toxicity enters when ambition is no longer tethered to a defined utility, but is driven purely by the fear of falling behind a peer group.
Ah, okay. The peer group.
Yeah. The formula to really understand this is that happiness or satisfaction is equal to results minus expectations.
Results minus expectation.
Exactly. When you are a visionary building a product to solve a real problem, your ambition is directed at the result, the thing you're building.
Right. The focus is on the output.
But when you are a board member committing insider trading just to pad a 9-figure bill account, your ambition is entirely hijacked by your expectations.
You just expect to be richer because everyone around you is.
Yes, you have to actively, aggressively work to keep your expectations anchored. If you allow your environment to dictate your expectations for you, no amount of results will ever yield satisfaction. Ever.
Which perfectly brings us to the environmental factor. The reason those expectations inflate isn't just happening in a vacuum, right?
No, not at all.
Housel points out that the primary catalyst for the moving goalpost is social comparison.
Oh, social comparison is the root of all of this.
And the mathematical reality of social comparison in the modern era is that the ceiling is so astronomically high, it is a battle that mathematically cannot be won.
Right, it's impossible.
Like, we aren't just comparing our harvest to the farmer next door anymore,
No, we're looking at the entire world on our phones.
Exactly. And the scale of modern comparison is what completely breaks the human brain's ability to process success.
It really does short-circuit us. Housel actually uses this concept called the wealth ladder to illustrate just how absurd this gets.
Oh, I love the wealth ladder example.
It's brilliant. It's basically an exercise in order of magnitude thinking. So he starts the ladder with a rookie baseball player making $500,000 a year.
Okay, let's really look at that for a second. $500,000.
Right. By any statistical measure of global or even just American wealth, earning $500,000 annually places you in an incredibly elite tier.
You are in the 1%. You have absolute financial security. You can buy a beautiful home. You can provide for your family effortlessly.
You're completely set.
The human brain really should look at that $500,000 check, release a massive flood of dopamine, and signal, hey, we have secured enough resources for survival. We are totally safe.
That's what should happen biologically.
Right. But that biological response gets immediately overridden by the social context.
Exactly, because that rookie baseball player doesn't live in a vacuum. He lives in a major league locker room.
Yeah, his peers aren't normal people anymore.
Right, so he plays on the exact same team as a veteran superstar, like, say, Mike Trout, who signed a 12-year, $430 million contract.
That is just a staggering amount of money.
It is. Trout is making roughly $36 million a year. So the rookie, who is objectively wealthy to you and me, looks across the locker room at Trout and feels relatively impoverished.
Because the absolute wealth is incredibly high, but the relative wealth is super low. But the cognitive dissonance doesn't even stop with the rookie. That's what's so terrifying about this. It's how quickly the human brain normalizes absurd wealth at every single rung of this ladder.
Oh, it never stops.
Because Mike Trout, making $36 million a year, is subject to the exact same evolutionary biology as the rookie.
The comparison game is entirely fractal. You zoom in or you zoom out, and the structure of envy looks exactly identical.
That's a great way to put it.
So Trout, earning his $36 million, he might interact with the ownership class, right? Or high-level finance people who buy the luxury suites.
Like the guys who literally own the teams.
Exactly. And if he compares himself to a top 10 hedge fund manager, as how it uses 2018 data for this, the baseline for even making that top 10 list was earning $340 million in a single year.
$340 million in 1 year. Suddenly, Trout's $36 million looks like a rounding error.
It really does. It's a tenfold leap.
It's an entirely different stratosphere of wealth.
And yet, the hedge fund manager making $340 million, he's looking upward too.
Of course he is.
He's looking at the top 5 hedge fund managers who pulled in $770 million that exact same year.
It just keeps doubling.
And those managers, the guys making $770 million, they're looking at Warren Buffett, whose personal net worth increased by $3.5 billion in 2018.
And just to push this entire thing to the absolute breaking point, Buffett isn't even the ceiling either.
No, he's not. In that same year, 2018, Jeff Bezos saw his net worth increase by $24 billion.
$24 billion.
In 1 year. Let's translate that back to the very start of our ladder. The amount of wealth Jeff Bezos accumulated per hour in 2018 was greater than the entire annual salary of the $500,000 a year baseball rookie.
Per hour. The sheer cognitive dissonance of looking at a $24 billion leap and somehow feeling inadequate is just, it's fascinating.
It breaks the brain.
Because the human brain is simply not equipped to comprehend those numbers as abstract concepts, so it just converts them into a social hierarchy.
Exactly. It just says he is higher in the tribe than I am.
But if our biology is hardwired by thousands of years of evolution to constantly scan the tribe and assess our status, because, historically being low status in a tribe meant you starved or were exiled, how do you practically rewire your brain?
That is the million-dollar question. Or billion-dollar question, I guess.
Right. How do you walk away from the comparison game when modern society is essentially beaming the scoreboard directly into your prefrontal cortex 24/7?
Well, you have to recognize the fundamental nature of the game you are playing. Housel shares this incredible quote from a Las Vegas casino dealer that serves as the perfect heuristic for this.
Oh, I remember this.
Yeah. When asked how to win in a casino, the dealer replied, "The only way to win in a Las Vegas casino is to exit as soon as you enter."
Because the house edge is a mathematical certainty.
Exactly.
Like if you play long enough, probability dictates you will eventually lose everything.
Precisely. And the game of social comparison has a house edge that is absolute.
Because there's always someone richer.
Yes. Because the ceiling of wealth is virtually infinite. There will always be someone with a larger number on a spreadsheet. So fighting the comparison battle basically guarantees a state of permanent inadequacy.
It really is a rigged game.
It's totally rigged. The only rational strategic move is to refuse to play it entirely. You have to consciously, actively accept that you might have enough, even if it is ostensibly less than the people in your immediate periphery.
Okay, but practically speaking, how do you operationalize that?
What do you mean?
Well, if I'm a founder or a young investor listening to this right now, and I truly internalize this idea of enough at, say, age 30 or 40, aren't I just giving myself a psychological excuse to coast? Like, how do you distinguish between developing a really healthy sense of enough and just giving up on your potential out of intellectual laziness?
That is actually the most common pushback to this entire philosophy.
I'm surprised.
But it fundamentally misunderstands what enough actually means in this context. People equate enough with a lack of ambition or with leaving chips on the table or, settling for mediocrity.
Right, they see it as a weakness.
Exactly. But in the architecture of wealth building, enough is not a restriction. It is a risk management tool.
A risk management tool. Okay, tell me more about that.
It is the exact opposite of regret. Housel actually uses this really visceral biological analogy to explain this, which is the process of eating.
Right, the satiety analogy.
Yeah, think about how you know you are physically full after a meal.
You just feel it.
Right, but the only way to truly scientifically determine the absolute maximum capacity of your stomach is to literally keep eating until you are physically sick and you vomit.
Yes, it's a grotesque image, but...
It is. It's super gross. But the logic is inescapable.
It really is.
And yet, very few people ever actually conduct that experiment. Why?
Because the physical agony of vomiting vastly outweighs the marginal pleasure of that final bite of food.
Precisely. We have a powerful biological feedback loop hormones like leptin that signals satiety, that stops us long before we reach the point of self-destruction.
We naturally leave potential food on the table.
Yes, because we intuitively understand that consuming it would cause us physical damage.
Right.
But the crazy thing is, when we transition from biology to business or investing, people completely abandon this logic.
Because capitalism lacks a leptin hormone.
That is exactly it.
There is no physical nausea when you add another zero to an asset column, or when you take on another turn of leverage. You just keep eating.
You never feel full.
You just keep reaching for more market share, more margin, more status, until you experience what is basically financial vomiting.
Financial vomiting is honestly the perfect term for it, and it manifests in really brutal ways.
What does it look like in the real world?
Well, it looks like the founder who grinds themselves into a severe clinical burnout. Or it looks like the real estate investor who takes on so much variable rate debt during a huge boom that they are completely liquidated in a downturn.
Right.
Or, going back to our starting point, it looks like Rajat Gupta committing federal crimes.
Wow, yeah.
They all lacked a satiety cue. They literally kept eating until they destroyed the host.
The inability to deny a potential dollar isn't a sign of elite ambition at all then. It's a fatal blind spot in your risk model.
Absolutely.
If you cannot say no to marginal gains, you are eventually going to say yes to catastrophic risk. It is basically a mathematical certainty.
It's unavoidable.
So you have to define your financial fullness cue before the market forces a liquidation event or before your health forces a hospital visit.
That is the core, actionable takeaway of this whole chapter. Establishing your own personal metric for enough is a proactive defense mechanism.
That's a shield.
Yes. It is building a firewall around the life you actually want to live and protecting it from the infinite demands of more.
I love that.
It is not a surrender of your ambition. It is the highly focused application of your ambition toward a sustainable goal.
Which really transitions us into arguably the most profound concept in Housel's analysis.
Yeah, this next part is great.
Because once you establish that firewall, what exactly are you protecting? Housel argues that no matter the potential financial upside, no matter the marginal gain, there are invaluable aspects of your life that should never, under any circumstances, be put on the table.
And this brings us to just a brilliant historical anecdote. It involves Joseph Heller, who is the author of the masterpiece Catch-22, and his friend, the writer Kurt Vonnegut.
Two absolute literary legends.
Right, and the setting is crucial here. They are at this incredibly lavish party on Shelter Island, surrounded by the absolute elite of the financial world.
The belly of the beast.
Exactly. The host of the party is this billionaire hedge fund manager.
So you have two literary giants standing in the epicenter of the modern wealth ladder. The contrast in metrics for success couldn't be starker.
Oh, it's night and day. So Vonnegut, kind of playing the role of the instigator, points out a really brutal mathematical reality to Heller.
What does he say?
He notes that their host, this hedge fund manager, had likely made more money in a single day of trading than Heller had earned over the entire global history of his wildly popular, culturally defining novel.
Which is just staggering to think about. Catch-22 is a cornerstone of American literature.
Right. And most people in Heller's position, hearing that, would instantly deploy ego defenses.
Oh, for sure. They would feel jealous, or they would try to minimize the hedge fund manager's work as just, soulless capitalism.
Yeah.
Just to protect their own sense of self-worth.
But Heller doesn't do that at all.
What does he do?
He exhibits this really profound, quiet confidence. He simply replies to Vonnegut, yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough.
Wow. Enough. It's such a disarming response.
It completely shuts it down.
It completely neutralizes the comparison game.
Mm-hmm.
Heller isn't playing the game of relative wealth at all. He is playing a completely different game with a defined endpoint.
Exactly. He understood his own metrics for success, and because he had already reached them, the hedge fund manager's billions were just completely irrelevant to his psychological state.
Heller basically possessed the ultimate financial asset, a calibrated internal compass.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it. Now, I want to juxtapose Heller's deep wisdom here with Rajat Gupta's tragic postmortem.
Oh, this is fascinating.
Remember, Gupta is the man who had the 100 million, couldn't find enough, and went to prison for insider trading.
Right, our guy from the beginning.
So after he served his time, Gupta actually gave an interview to the New York Times.
Really?
Yeah. He was asked about his fall from grace, and he claimed he had learned this really profound philosophical lesson in prison.
I can't wait to hear this.
He said, and I quote, "Don't get too attached to anything, your reputation, your accomplishments, or any of it. I think about it now, what does it matter? Okay, this thing unjustly destroyed my reputation. That's only troubling if I am so attached to my reputation."
Oh, man. I am so glad Housel included that quote in the book, because it is an incredibly dangerous piece of psychology to just leave unchallenged.
It really is.
Like, Gupta is attempting to frame his downfall as this exercise in stoicism.
Yes, he's trying to sound like Marcus Aurelius or something.
Right, detaching himself from earthly concerns. But it's not stoicism. It's nihilism masking as self-preservation.
Exactly.
It is incredibly backward to pretend your reputation doesn't matter only after you have completely vaporized it.
It is the ultimate psychological shield. It's just the comforting, desperate self-justification of a man who is trying to cope with the reality that he permanently destroyed what was actually invaluable.
He can't face the music.
No, he cannot mentally afford to admit the true magnitude of his failure, so he just declares that the things he lost were worthless to begin with.
It's ego defense at its absolute most transparent. I mean, to everyone listening right now, if you want a reliable metric for return on investment, the ultimate ROI is the ability to sleep at night with your integrity intact. Your reputation is not a disposable asset that you can just detach from when it's convenient for you.
Housel actually lays this out as a fundamental law of financial physics.
A law of financial physics.
Yeah. Reputation is invaluable. Freedom and independence are invaluable. Family, friends, and a clear conscience are invaluable.
Things you literally cannot buy.
Right. And the only strategy that guarantees the protection of those assets is knowing when it is time to stop taking risks that might jeopardize them.
Knowing when to walk away.
There is absolutely no logical justification, no mathematical model anywhere that supports risking what you currently have and desperately need in order to acquire what you don't have and objectively don't even need.
That is perfectly said. If we synthesize everything we've unpacked today, it really points to a radical redefinition of wealth itself.
It flips the whole concept on its head.
True wealth isn't an absolute number on a balance sheet. It isn't determined by how efficiently you can scale that infinite ladder of social comparison we talked about.
Not at all.
True wealth is determined by your psychological capacity to look at your life, look at your resources, and authentically say, I have enough.
And honestly, the math of accumulation is relatively simple.
Right. Earn more, spend less, invest the difference.
Exactly. The math is easy. But the psychology of retention is vastly more complex. The most profound financial insight you can possibly cultivate is the recognition of your own boundary line.
Finding your leptin hormone for money.
Yes. When you master the word enough, you essentially immunize yourself against the toxic envy that modern capitalism constantly generates, and you build this impenetrable fortress around the invaluable assets that money literally cannot replace.
You stop the goalpost from moving.
You have to.
You recognize the biological necessity of an endpoint. You step away from the casino table while you still have your chips, and you just refuse to leverage the invaluable for the unnecessary.
That's the whole game right there.
But, this raises a fascinating, almost existential question that goes even beyond Housel's chapter.
Okay, lay it on me.
If our brains are biologically wired for scarcity and constant status comparison, what happens to human psychology if we ever reach a point of technological post-scarcity?
Oh, wow. That's deep.
Right. Like, if AI and automation eventually make basic resources completely abundant for everyone, will we finally be satisfied? Or will we just invent entirely new, invisible metrics to compare ourselves against and keep running on a new virtual treadmill?
Knowing human nature, probably the treadmill.
Probably. So think about the underlying architecture of your own desires the next time you look at a spreadsheet. Now that you have the framework to stop the goalposts and protect your foundational assets, you're perfectly positioned to let time do the heavy lifting for you.
Which is where the real magic happens.
Right, exactly. Which is why, the next time we dive into this material, we're going to explore the confounding, logic-defying mechanics of compounding. So, what if I told you that if this most famous investor in the entire world, a guy whose name is basically just synonymous with unimaginable wealth, right?
Right, the ultimate benchmark.
Yeah, exactly. What if I told you that if he had just been a normal person, his net worth today wouldn't be $84 billion.
Oh, we give you.
It would be $11.9 million.
I mean, it's just one of those statistics that makes you completely recalibrate how you view success.
It really does.
You're talking about a scenario that literally wipes out 99.9% of Warren Buffett's wealth. And that happens just by altering one single, completely mundane variable in his life story.
And it fundamentally shatters how we usually analyze high achievers, doesn't it?
Mhm.
I mean, we tend to look at someone like Buffett and assume, well, his wealth is purely the result of some singular, unmatched genius.
Like he has a crystal ball or something.
Exactly. We think he's just picking the right stocks at the exact right time every time. We assume he has this secret formula that the rest of us just don't have access to.
But when you actually look at the raw data we are diving into today, a very different and honestly almost uncomfortable reality emerges.
Highly uncomfortable for our brains, yeah.
Because out of Warren Buffett's $84.5 billion net worth, $81.5 billion of those dollars came after his 65th birthday.
Wait, 81.5
After
billion.
he turned 65.
Yeah. That is just, I mean, our brains are simply not built to handle that kind of math.
No, not at all. We desperately want to attribute the 84 billion entirely to skill, but the timeline tells a completely different story.
It really does. So today, welcome to our deep dive into Chapter 4 of our source material, which is titled Confounding Compounding.
It's such a great chapter.
It is. Over the next hour or so, you are about to learn why human beings fundamentally misunderstand how growth actually works.
We're going to explore why mastering the deeply counterintuitive math of compounding is, honestly, the ultimate shortcut to success.
Whether you are interested in business, entrepreneurship, or simply just building wealth over a lifetime, this is for you. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's get into it. And to really get to the bottom of this, we actually need to step away from finance entirely for a minute.
Which I love, by the way.
Right, because the mechanics of compounding aren't just some economic theory that a guy in a suit invented. They are a physical reality of the universe.
The law of nature.
Exactly. And the absolute best place to see this in action is by looking at the billion-year history of ice ages on Earth.
Which is such a brilliant place to start. Because if you're trying to figure out how someone builds an $84 billion financial empire, your mind definitely doesn't naturally drift toward paleoclimatology.
No, it really doesn't. But the parallels are just perfect. And to understand the parallel, you kind of have to look at the history of how human beings figured out the Earth's past.
Right.
There's this fascinating quirk in our scientific history. We actually mapped out the heavens way before we understood the ground beneath our own feet.
Yeah, I remember reading about this. It was Isaac Newton, right? He was calculating the precise movement of the stars and, the laws of gravity hundreds of years before we had even a basic understanding of our own planet's geological history.
Exactly. We were looking up, solving celestial mechanics while remaining almost entirely oblivious to the massive churning geological forces right under our boots.
Like, we literally didn't know how our own planet worked.
We had no idea. And because we didn't understand the slow, hidden forces of the Earth, early geologists were completely baffled by the landscape.
Because they'd see these weird anomalies.
Right. When they eventually found undeniable physical evidence that the Earth had once been covered in massive ice sheets, and not just once, by the way, but multiple times, they couldn't explain it.
They were just staring at these massive geological features.
Yeah, valleys carved out of solid rock, giant boulders moved hundreds of miles from where they should be. And the question was just, what on earth could possibly possess the power to freeze the entire globe?
I mean, if you're a 19th century scientist and you see that a glacier the size of a whole continent has somehow just crushed its way across North America, the natural assumption is, well, it must have been a catastrophe.
Right, because that's what intuitively makes sense to our linear human brains.
You think massive result equals massive cause.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, they assumed there had to be, like, a severe shift in the Earth's orbit, or a sudden, dramatic drop in the sun's temperature.
Or like massive volcanic eruptions blocking out the sun to create some apocalyptic global winter.
Right, a cataclysm. And that scientific assumption perfectly mirrors how we think about wealth, business, and success today.
Oh, that's such a good point.
We assume that a massive, world-altering outcome requires a massive, world-altering force. But that is simply not how ice ages happen.
The reality of how the Earth actually froze over is much quieter, isn't it?
Much quieter, and paradoxically, much more powerful.
It wasn't an apocalyptic freeze at all. It didn't happen overnight. It was literally just a slightly cooler summer.
That's it. That is the entire mechanism. The process that created glaciers capable of carving out the Great Lakes is breathtakingly simple.
You don't need a cataclysm.
No, you just need a summer that is barely cooler than average. It doesn't even trigger a sudden global freeze. It just means that when summer ends, not all of the previous winter's snow has melted away.
So you're left with a very thin, maybe just a few inches thick, layer of ice heading into the next winter.
Exactly, just a tiny layer of leftover ice. And here is where the compounding mechanism actually clicks into gear. Ice is highly reflective, right?
The albedo effect.
Yes, the albedo effect.
Yeah.
So that thin layer of leftover ice sits there, and when the sun comes out, it bounces solar radiation right back into space.
It doesn't absorb the heat like dark soil or, ocean water would.
Exactly. Because it reflects that heat away, the subsequent year becomes just a tiny fraction of a degree colder.
And because that next year is a fraction of a degree colder, a little more snow falls the next winter.
And even less of it melts the following summer.
which leaves an even thicker layer of ice.
which covers a wider surface area, which reflects even more sunlight away from the Earth, which cools the planet even more.
Until, thousands of years later, you have an ice sheet 2 miles thick covering the entire northern hemisphere.
It is the ultimate proof that you do not need tremendous force to create tremendous results.
That's wild when you really think about it.
If something compounds, if it feeds on itself, a little bit of growth serves as the actual fuel for future growth. A small starting base, if it's just left uninterrupted, can lead to results so extraordinary they seem to defy logic entirely.
Okay, I understand the physics of it, and it makes total sense.
Ah.
But I want to push back a little on how this maps to human behavior.
Okay, go for it.
Because if you are navigating the modern world of business or entrepreneurship today, this slow, quiet approach goes against literally everything we are taught.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, we are constantly bombarded with the narrative of the massive disruption. If you want to be successful, you are told you need a viral moment, a massive round of venture capital, a revolutionary product launch that changes the world overnight.
We are addicted to the Big Bang.
Yes, we don't celebrate the slightly cooler summer. We celebrate the meteor strike.
You're entirely right about the culture. Business culture absolutely lionizes the massive immediate force. We want the explosive IPO. We want the startup that goes from zero to $1 billion in 18 months.
It feels like we are taught that building a business or building wealth is like trying to push a massive boulder up a steep hill in one go.
That's a great analogy.
You need maximum leverage. You need a team of people pushing with everything they have. You need to exert immense agonizing force. And if you let off the gas for even 1 second...
The boulder rolls backward and crushes you.
Exactly. But what the Ice Age example suggests is that wealth creation isn't a boulder at all. It's actually like rolling a tiny snowball down a very, very long hill.
I think the boulder versus the snowball is just the perfect way to visualize the disconnect between how we think growth works and how it actually works.
Right?
The boulder requires constant, monumental, exhausting effort just to maintain its position, let alone move forward. But the snowball is entirely different.
Because gravity does the work.
Exactly. It requires a small initial formation, yes, you have to pack the snow together with your own hands. But after that, it requires the hill, it requires the environment and gravity.
The snowball just feeds on itself.
As it rolls, its circumference expands, which means its surface area expands, which allows it to pick up even more snow with every single rotation at an accelerating rate.
So the translation for someone listening right now, someone who might be stressing out because they haven't had their meteor strike moment yet.
Yeah, the practical takeaway here.
Right. The takeaway is that you don't actually need a massive one-off windfall to build wealth or to build a successful project. You don't need to sell a tech startup in your 20s or inherit a fortune or invent the next disruptive technology.
You really don't.
You just need a small, consistent baseline that is allowed to feed on itself.
You need to focus less on the magnitude of your initial effort and significantly more on ensuring that whatever effort you do make can sustain itself and compound over time without being interrupted.
Wow. Okay, so if the secret to the snowball is the length of the hill, then we naturally have to look at the investor who has been rolling his snowball down the longest hill in modern financial history.
We have to talk about Buffett.
Let's return to that wild thought experiment about Warren Buffett that we opened with.
It's honestly the most clarifying way to view his success, because we are so used to analyzing Buffett through the lens of his stock-picking acumen.
Right, like what companies he buys, what management teams he trusts, how he reads a balance sheet.
But the data forces us to look at his life through a completely different lens. And that is the lens of uninterrupted time.
Okay, let's walk through the actual timeline because this blew my mind. Warren Buffett didn't start investing in his 20s or 30s like most professionals.
No, he didn't.
He started seriously investing when he was 10 years old.
Man.
And by the time he reached the age of 30, he had accumulated a net worth of $1 million. Now, in today's money, if we adjust for inflation, that is about $9.3 million.
Which is an incredibly impressive starting base for a 30-year-old.
It's massively impressive, but it's also a complete outlier. I mean,
Yeah.
Very few 10-year-olds are studying corporate balance sheets and allocating capital.
Right, most 10-year-olds are riding bikes and playing video games.
Exactly. So the thought experiment asks us to normalize him.
Yeah.
What if Warren Buffett was just a regular guy?
Let's make an average.
Let's say he spent his teens and his 20s doing what most people do, exploring the world, figuring out what he wanted to study, maybe trying and failing at a few different early career paths.
Having a normal quarter-life crisis.
Right. And let's say that by age 30, instead of having an inflation-adjusted $9.3 million, he had a very respectable, completely normal net worth for a young professional. Let's give him $25,000 at age 30.
Okay, that is a completely ordinary, totally relatable financial starting line.
Now let's keep his singular genius completely intact.
Okay.
From age 30 to age 60, this normal Warren Buffett still goes on to earn the extraordinary, world-beating 22% annual returns that the real Buffett has historically generated.
He's still a genius stock picker.
Yes, still a genius.
Yeah.
But being a normal guy, he decides that 60 is a great age to hang it up. He's made his money, he's tired of the grind.
He wants to relax.
He retires to play golf, travel, and spend time with his grandkids. He fundamentally stops rolling the snowball.
So we are looking at 30 years of compounding at a genius-level rate of return.
Exactly. If that were his story, 30 years of 22% return starting with $25,000, what would his net worth be today?
It wouldn't be $84.5 billion.
No, it would be $11.9 million.
It's just a staggering visualization.
It really is.
It means that 99.9% of his actual real-world net worth is entirely the result of the time he spent investing outside of traditional working years.
99.9%. That means effectively all of Warren Buffett's mythic financial success is tied to the financial base he built while he was going through puberty and the longevity he maintained while he was in his geriatric years.
It's crazy.
The middle part, the normal working years that we all stress so much about, it's almost statistically irrelevant compared to the tail ends of the timeline.
The math here is just cold and inescapable. We idolize his skill, but his actual secret weapon is time.
Right.
His skill is what allowed him to build the snowball, but his age is the hill.
That's the perfect way to phrase it. His age is the hill. And to really cement how powerful the hill is compared to the snowball itself, we have to look at another figure, a man who, by the raw metric of investing skill, absolutely annihilates Warren Buffett.
Yes, we definitely have to talk about Jim Simons.
Jim Simons is such a fascinating character. He's an award-winning mathematician, a former codebreaker for the government, and the founder of the hedge fund Renaissance Technologies.
He's basically a math wizard.
Exactly. And the numbers his medallion fund produced are genuinely terrifying. Since 1988, Jim Simons compounded money at a staggering 66% annually.
Just to put that into perspective for anyone listening, a 66% annual return over decades is completely unheard of.
It's insane.
It defies the laws of financial gravity. Warren Buffett's average is roughly 22%, right? Simons was generating 3 times the annual return of the man widely considered the greatest investor in history.
3 times.
No one in the modern financial era even comes close to Simons' record. Not even close.
So if investing is purely a game of skill, measured by your annual rate of return, Jim Simons is the undisputed, unparalleled champion of the world. He makes Buffett look like an amateur.
Mathematically speaking, yes.
And yet, if you look at Jim Simons' net worth at the time this data was compiled, it was $21 billion.
Which obviously is an astronomical sum of money. Let's be clear about that.
It is, yeah. But we're comparing him to Buffett.
Mm-hmm.
Simons, the guy generating 3 times the returns, is 75% less rich than Warren Buffett.
This is the paradox that completely breaks our linear brains.
It really does. How can someone who is mathematically 3 times better at generating wealth end up 75% less wealthy?
Because Jim Simons didn't find his ultimate investment stride with the medallion fund until he was 50 years old.
Ah, there it is.
He had less than half as many years to compound his money as Buffett did. He was rolling a much denser, much faster-growing snowball, but he was rolling it down a much, much shorter hill.
A shorter hill makes all the difference.
And this leads to what is arguably the most mind-blowing hypothetical we can explore today.
I know where you're going with this.
We know what Simons did over a few decades.
Yeah.
But what if Jim Simons had started when he was 10? What if he had been able to earn his 66% annual returns over the exact same 70-year time span that Warren Buffett has been investing?
Okay, I'm going to ask you to break down the math on this, because when I first saw the number in the source material, I actually thought it was a typo.
A lot of people do. It's not a typo, but it is a number that absolutely pushes the boundaries of reality. If you take a starting base and compound it at 66% annually for 70 years, Jim Simons' net worth would be...
Brace yourself.
63 quintillion, 900 quadrillion, 781 zillion, 780 billion, 748 million, $160,000.
Let's just sit that for a second. $63 quintillion. I don't even know how to visualize a quintillion.
You can. Nobody can. To give you some context, the total global GDP, the value of all goods and services produced by every single human being on Earth in a given year, is roughly $100 trillion.
100 trillion compared to 63 quintillion.
Exactly. 63 quintillion is so large, it's practically meaningless in a terrestrial economic sense. It's an absurd, completely impractical number. There literally isn't that much wealth on the entire planet.
But the absurdity is exactly the point, right?
Precisely. The fact that the number breaks reality is the lesson here. What seem like relatively small changes in growth assumptions, like just adding a few extra decades to a time horizon, lead to numbers so massive they defy comprehension.
Because it's exponential.
Right. The curve of exponential growth stays relatively flat for a long time, and then suddenly it just goes entirely vertical.
This brings up such an empowering realization for you as the listener. You might look at the hyper-successful people in your industry and think, well, I'll never have their raw talent.
Sure, imposter syndrome kicks in.
Exactly. You think, I'll never be able to code like them or market like them or, pick stocks like Jim Simons. But this paradox proves that while a person's skill might dictate their daily output, their actual secret weapon is endurance.
Endurance is everything.
Skill is just the rate at which the snowball gathers snow. Time is the length of the hill. And a very long hill with a moderate rate of gathering will almost always beat a short hill with a really aggressive rate of gathering.
The overarching lesson is to start as early as you can, whatever your endeavor is, and most importantly, do not interrupt the process. Let the hill do the work for you.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because if we map this out, and the math is this undeniable, and the secret to immense wealth or success is essentially just time, why do so few people actually rely on it?
It's the million-dollar question.
Right. Why are we constantly, almost neurotically, chasing quick wins, rapid growth, and the highest possible immediate returns, even when we know intellectually that patience wins?
It's not a moral failing. We have to be clear about that. It's a biological one.
Really?
Yes, the human brain is fundamentally not built to handle compounding logic. We are wired through millions of years of evolution for a strictly linear world.
Think about our evolutionary history as hunter-gatherers, right? Everything was linear back then.
Completely linear.
If I take 1 step, I move 1 meter. If I take 2 steps, I move 2 meters. If I spend an hour foraging and gather 1 bushel of berries, I have food for a day. If I spend 2 hours and gather 2 bushels, I have food for 2 days.
1 unit of input equals 1 unit of output.
Exactly. It's totally straightforward.
And there was absolutely no survival advantage on the ancestral savanna to understanding what happens when a variable feeds on itself exponentially.
I mean, you weren't trying to compound your berry collection over 30 years.
Exactly. If you are trying to avoid a predator, you need to calculate linear speed and distance. You don't need to calculate compounding trajectories. So our brains simply never developed the intuitive software to process exponential growth.
Let's put this cognitive flaw to the test right now. Let's do a little math exercise to show exactly how our brains fail.
I love this exercise.
If I ask you, the listener, to calculate 8 plus 8 plus 8, 9 times in your head, you can do it pretty easily. It takes a few seconds. 8 times 9 is 72.
It's intuitive. We can easily visualize 72 apples in a basket.
Right. It scales linearly. The output matches our expectation of the input. But what happens when we change the operator from addition to multiplication?
This is where the brain just breaks down.
Let's try it. Calculate 8 times 8 times 8 9 times. Let's actually walk through it. 8 times 8 is 64. Okay, easy enough.
Still with you.
Times 8 is 512. Now it's getting a little heavy.
A little harder to visualize.
Times 8 is 4,096. By the 4th iteration, the numbers are starting to just detach from our intuitive grasp.
And if you force yourself to carry that calculation out to the 9th iteration, the answer isn't a few thousand.
No.
The answer is 134,217,728.
It's staggering. The inputs are exactly the same, the number 8, 9 times. But simply changing the relationship between those numbers from addition to multiplication results in an outcome that our brains cannot intuitively predict or visualize at all.
Not even a little bit. Every single time we encounter exponential growth, we underestimate the outcome.
Every time.
What's fascinating here is that this cognitive blind spot isn't just something that affects lay people or, those who struggle with math.
Right.
It is a universal human flaw. Even the most brilliant, forward-thinking, mathematically gifted minds in the entire world fall victim to this exact same cognitive trap when they encounter compounding in the wild.
We see this all the time in the technology sector, right?
Right.
Because tech is essentially just applied exponential growth.
Exactly. The evolution of computer hard drives is one of the purest real-world examples of compounding growth we have outside of
Oh,
finance.
this is a great example.
Let's look at the timeline. In the 1950s, a state-of-the-art computer hard drive, like the IBM 305 RAMAC, was the size of two large refrigerators.
Literally massive.
It had to be moved with a forklift, and it held about 3.5 megabytes of data.
To put that in perspective for today, 3.5 megabytes is roughly the size of one single medium-resolution photograph on a smartphone,
One photo.
and it took up an entire room.
Right. So from the 1950s to the 1990s, we saw roughly 40 years of dedicated innovation. 40 years of the smartest engineers on the planet working tirelessly to shrink these drives and increase their capacity.
We still did.
Yes. And by 1990, a standard PC hard drive had advanced to about 200 megabytes.
Which at the time felt like a massive leap, going from 3.5 to 200 over 4 decades.
It was a huge leap. But that was just the flat part of the compounding curve. The snowball was still relatively small. But look at what happened next. From 1990 to today, we didn't just add another 200 megabytes.
No, because the math changed.
Exactly. Because the growth was compounding on a larger and larger base, the curve went vertical. Over the next few decades, standard storage capacities jumped by 100 million megabytes.
That's 100 million. That is the snowball was finally far enough down the hill that the amount of snow it was picking up with each single revolution became incomprehensibly massive.
Right. A micro SD card the size of a fingernail today holds more data than massive server farms did a few decades ago.
And because our brains are hopelessly linear, even the people driving that very technology couldn't predict the curve.
They really couldn't. There's a perfect historical anecdote about this.
Oh, the Gmail story.
Yes. In 2004, Google announced a new email service called Gmail. And their big selling point was that it would offer 1 full gigabyte of free storage space.
Which sounded absolutely insane at the time, considering competitors were offering something like, what, 2 or 4 megabytes?
Exactly. Hotmail gave you a couple of megabytes, and you were constantly deleting emails to make room. And the most telling reaction to Gmail's announcement came from Bill Gates.
Bill Gates.
The man who arguably built the modern personal computing revolution. When Gates heard about Gmail offering a gigabyte of storage, he famously questioned why anyone would possibly need that much space.
It's wild to think about. Bill Gates, the ultimate tech visionary, couldn't fathom a use case for a single gigabyte of storage.
Because he was anchored in the past. As technology writers have pointed out, despite Gates's deep currency with cutting-edge technologies, his mentality in that specific moment was anchored in an old paradigm.
Right.
A paradigm where storage was a scarce commodity that had to be carefully conserved. He looked back at the relatively flat growth of the 70s and 80s, drew a straight line into the future, and concluded that a gigabyte was just vast overkill.
If Bill Gates in 2004 couldn't intuitively grasp the compounding trajectory of digital storage, a field he literally helped invent and dominate, what hope do the rest of us have when we're looking at our retirement accounts, or our business growth, or our long-term projects?
It is a profoundly humbling realization. It proves that we simply never get accustomed to how quickly things can grow when they are compounding. The math always outpaces our imagination.
This serves as such an important warning about trusting your own instincts. Because compounding isn't intuitive, we constantly ignore its potential.
We self-sabotage.
We really do. We look at small, consistent progress in our daily lives, like saving a little money each month, or learning a new skill for 20 minutes a day, slowly building a client base. And our linear brains scream at us, this isn't enough, we aren't moving fast enough, the needle isn't moving.
Your brain wants the 8 plus 8 plus 8 visibility. It wants to see the immediate linear result of the effort. When it doesn't, it just assumes the strategy is failing.
So you have to learn to override your biology. You have to trust the cold, hard math of compounding rather than relying on your daily intuition, because your intuition will always underestimate exponential growth.
And if you rely on your intuition, you will inevitably interrupt the compounding process.
You'll stop the snowball.
Exactly. You will get bored or you will get scared and you will try to force a linear result because you can't see the exponential curve forming. You will pivot to a new strategy, or you will cash out your investments, or you will swing for the fences.
Wait, let me stop you right there. If our brains are actively biologically working against us, how do we practically survive this?
That is the big question.
How do we apply this to our own portfolios, our careers, or our businesses today without self-sabotaging?
The answer is almost comically simple on paper, but it is emotionally excruciating to execute in the real world.
Okay, lay it on me.
Well, think about this. There are over 2,000 books currently in print that analyze Warren Buffett's success. Think about that entire industry. 2,000 authors analyzing every single move he's ever made.
It's an entire genre of literature at this point.
They detail his economic cycle theories, they break down his options trading strategies, his sector bets, his management style, how he reads the footnotes of a balance sheet.
We write and read thousands of books looking for the complex answer because we desperately want the complex answer.
Exactly. A complex answer validates our biological desire to put in massive linear effort. If success requires reading 2,000 books and mastering complex algorithms, then our hard work feels justified.
But none of those 2,000 books are titled, "This guy has been investing consistently for 3/4 of a century."
Even though that mathematically is the key to the vast majority of his success. The secret isn't necessarily what he bought or even when he bought it. The secret is how long he held it.
The ultimate takeaway here is that the most powerful book on finance shouldn't be a 300-page textbook on valuation models. It should be a one-page book.
A pamphlet, really.
And the title of that book should just be "Shut Up and Wait."
And the only text on that single page should be a long-term chart of historical economic growth.
Shut up and wait. I mean, it sounds like an insult, honestly. It sounds dismissive, but it is actually the most profound, difficult strategic advice you could ever receive.
Because the danger, the trap that our linear brains set for us is that we devote all of our effort to earning the absolute highest returns possible in the shortest amount of time.
We constantly tinker, we pivot our business models, we look for the new hot trend, we try to time the stock market.
We do this because it intuitively seems like the best way to get rich quickly.
We all want to be Jim Simons. We want the 66% return right now.
We want the boulder at the top of the hill today. We don't want to wait 30 years for the snowball to roll. But what happens when you chase the 66% return?
I'll tell you what happens, because I've done it, and I'm sure listeners have felt this urge too. You take on massive risk. You concentrate your bets. You leverage yourself.
Yep.
And for a while, it might work. You might feel like a total genius.
Yeah.
But eventually, the math catches up with you. The risk you took to get that massive return blows up in your face.
It always does.
You suffer a massive loss, and worst of all, you reset your compounding clock back to zero.
That is the critical failure.
Right.
Interrupting the compounding process is the cardinal sin of wealth creation. Good investing and good business isn't about earning the absolute highest returns.
Right.
It's about earning pretty good returns that you can stick with and repeat for the longest possible period of time.
It's about surviving. It's about building a portfolio or a business or a life structure that is durable enough to survive the inevitable bad years, the recessions, the cooler summers, without forcing you to quit.
Exactly. If you can earn an average return, but you can do it without ever interrupting the compounding process, the math basically guarantees that you will eventually achieve extraordinary results.
The hard part isn't the math. The hard part is the endurance. Shut up and wait is incredibly difficult when the market drops 30% and every alarm bell in your brain is screaming at you to do something, to act, to protect yourself.
It requires a profound level of psychological resilience to just do nothing.
So what does this all mean? If we step back and look at this entire exploration, the soul of this concept is a revelation about the tools we use to build a successful life.
The greatest financial tool at your disposal isn't a complex trading algorithm. It isn't taking massive leveraged risks. It isn't finding a groundbreaking, world-changing disruption before anyone else does.
It is the simple, quiet, and deeply confounding magic of time and endurance. It is the slightly cooler summer, repeated over millennia, that slowly but unstoppably builds the ice age.
It is trusting a mathematical reality that you cannot intuitively visualize and having the discipline to let it work.
As we've learned today, earning huge returns that you can't hold on to leads to some incredibly tragic outcomes. Because resetting the clock is the one thing you absolutely cannot afford to do, which is exactly the kind of cautionary tale we will uncover in our next deep dive.
But before we go, I want you to ask yourself this. Look at your own life, your career, your investments. What is one area right now where you are exhausting yourself, taking on unnecessary stress and risk, trying to force a 66% return when all you really need is a reliable 22% and the patience to just shut up and wait?
Imagine what the end of that timeline looks like if you just gave the snowball enough time to roll.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.